Chapter 24:11. However, Princess Mingzhu was not overly worried because of this. She felt that in this battle, she would be able to make up for all the flaws in her cultivation. Plus, she had Xiaoyang by her side. If they worked together, they might be able to win, even though it would be very difficult. So what? The first step had to be taken. As for the result, it would depend on how hard they worked. In the blink of an eye, Princess Mingzhu pulled out her sword. The battle was about to begin. She had to be fully focused in order to be effective. At the same time, Xiaoyang held the thunder fire sword in his hand. He looked around and began to observe the changes around him. Fighting in a different world could be said to be at the right time, the right place, and the right people. Therefore, if he still wanted to fight as he pleased like he did in the flowing cloud world, it was inevitable that he would be asking for trouble. Soon, the two of them locked onto the Almighty, who was cultivating in the belly of the mountain and determined his location. At this moment, the powerful cultivator in the mountain suddenly opened his eyes. Immediately, an extremely powerful aura spread out. It was very ferocious, and like a tide, it continued to spread. Being targeted and locked onto like this, even a man made of mud would be angry. Plus, this powerful cultivator was the leader of one of the top 10 tribes in the realm of beasts. As a 5th-level martial king, he was a respected existence in the entire realm of beasts. Under such circumstances, how could he accept the covetous eyes of some rascals? At once, this powerful cultivator was furious. He directly broke out of his cultivation and stood on top of the mountain. He coldly looked down. This powerful cultivator saw a man and a woman, each holding a sword. His murderous intent was revealed. Towards these two cultivators, the powerful cultivator frowned slightly, because in the realm of beasts, he had never seen or heard of these two people. As such, he was unsure of what was going on right now. This powerful cultivator looked very small, but there was a glimmer of light in his eyes. It was obvious that only those who were good at fighting would have this kind of look. Plus, to be able to rise up in the realm of beasts and become an overlord. How could they be simple? Without experiencing countless killings, it was naturally difficult for him to reach his current position. Is this Shengongqi of the multicolor tribe? Xiaoyang exclaimed in admiration. Shengongqi was a genius who had risen rapidly in the multicolor tribe in the past 1,000 years. It could be said that when the multicolor tribe was on the verge of collapse, it was because of his strength that they were able to turn the tide and maintain their current position. Otherwise, the multicolor tribe would have been annihilated in the internal strife of the 10,000 beasts realm. Moreover, Shengongqi was relatively young, only about 2,000 years old. In the myriad beast realm, he could be said to be a top-notch genius. There were even many people who speculated that with Shengongqi's talent, perhaps thousands of years later, the ranking of the top 10 tribes would change because of his rise. If everything went smoothly, they might even be able to enter the top 5 of the top 10 tribes. As such, many clans knew about this and tried to befriend him. At that time, if he could handle the relationship well, it might save him a lot of trouble. However, these things only existed in their expectations. However, Shengongqi had always been respected. Even if some tribes felt that he had become a threat, they did not dare to act rashly. Otherwise, if that person knew, he would not have agreed. When the time came and these responsibilities were investigated, which tribe could bear it? Moreover, Shengongqi could be said to have a promising future. He was valued by some old fellows who had a say in the 10,000 beasts realm. Perhaps in the future, he might even have a place in the decisions of the Wanshou realm. Shengongqi also understood this. If the multicolor tribe wanted to continue, they could only rely on his strength alone. Therefore, during the war with the Inflame world, he did not move out. Moreover, he was wholeheartedly in seclusion. He wanted to be able to take another step forward, so that his tribe could rise because of his strength alone. Being interrupted in the middle of his seclusion, Shengongqi was extremely angry. What was going on? You two little fellows, how dare you disturb my seclusion? Shingongqi frowned and scolded. At the same time, Shingongqi also clearly saw their realms. However, because of this, Shingongqi had some doubts in his heart. Their realms were low, but they still dared to come and act presumptuously. If that was not seeking death, what was it? Which family of juniors are you? You don't know what's good for you. In detail, as long as your elders are respected enough, I can consider letting you go. Shingongqi scolded. Shingongqi's strength was not bad. In fact, in the entire 10,000 beasts realm, he was one of the top existences. However, he still had some scruples. If these two little fellows were the disciples of that big tribe, once they were killed by mistake, the multicolor tribe would inevitably be targeted. Therefore, it was better to be careful. Shingongqi had a little more patience. As long as the matter of the price was clear, then he could decide how to deal with it. Xiaoyang took a deep breath and said, "You don't need to know." When Shingongqi heard this, an extremely strong killing intent was reflected in his eyes. This was because he did not want to see what this little fellow was scheming in his heart. He actually dared to speak, so arrogantly. At the same time, Shingongqi also sensed more information. These two people seemed to be real humans. They did not have the aura that belonged to ferocious beasts. This matter made him feel a little confused for a moment. What exactly was wrong? But he couldn't put his finger on it. Princess Mingzhu waved her treasured sword. Immediately, her aura began to rise rapidly again. Since a battle was inevitable, why waste time talking? What arrogant juniors! I don't know if your strength is worthy of such big words. Shingongqi scolded angrily. Shingongqi was very careful in everything he did. He was even very cautious. However, he was very dissatisfied with this junior's answer. In fact, his killing intent had already been aroused. However, because he was not clear about the situation, he did not dare to act rashly. After all, it was very easy to kill some juniors who did not know what was good for them. If they killed geniuses from other tribes, the multicolor tribe would not have an easy time either. Chapter 24:12. Shingongqi still didn't dare to act rashly because the opponent's aura was too fierce. Moreover, he had been in seclusion for a long time, and he had heard that some geniuses had emerged in some tribes. Although he was angry, Shingongqi couldn't just focus on his momentary pleasure. If he was not careful and provoked those people, would his multicolor tribe not be destroyed? Thus, under such circumstances, he had sufficient patience. Even though he was extremely unhappy in his heart, and even wanted to chop these two young men who didn't know the immensity of heaven and earth into pieces, or even grind their bones to dust, he still couldn't control himself. However, he still didn't dare to act rashly. Originally, the multicolor tribe was relying on him to shoulder the burden alone. There were even some forces around who coveted him. At that time, killing people would become an excuse, and he would really be in trouble. As for Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu, they did not know what the great being in front of them was afraid of. Seeing how angry he was but not attacking, they felt that it was a little strange. What exactly was going on? He couldn't say for sure. However, he was certain that there must be a reason behind this. Soon, Xiaoyang began to review the information he had received. Shingongqi had always been a ruthless person. In order to stabilize the stability of the multicolor tribe, he had personally massacred 3 of the surrounding top 100 tribes. It could be said that blood flowed like a river. Of course, Shingongqi did not act for no reason. The main reason was that these 3 tribes had formed an alliance and wanted to work together to divide the multicolored mountain range. However, they did not know that Shingongqi, this freak, had a cultivation realm that they could not compete with as soon as he came out of seclusion. That was why the tribe was annihilated. It could be said that Shingongqi's battle had pulled the multicolored tribe back from the brink of collapse. For the sake of higher status and glory, the internal strife within the myriad beast realm had never ended. After all, if they could have a higher ranking, they would have more authority to speak. Under such circumstances, who could resist such temptation? Moreover, at that time, the multicolor tribe was truly lacking in talents. It was as if a great building was about to collapse. Speak quickly, don't waste my time. Shingongqi shouted angrily. As for the purpose of these two juniors coming here, Shingongqi wasn't sure. At the same time, the things he was worried about naturally increased. At the very least, he would not allow such a situation to occur now. Even Shingongqi felt a sense of danger in his heart. This sense of danger was because he felt that the multicolor tribe was once again in a precarious state. Could it be that they really couldn't live in peace anymore? Thinking of this, Shingongqi was furious. However, for the sake of the bigger picture, no matter how many personal feelings he had, he could only suppress them. After all, a lack of forbearance in small matters would spoil great plans. Only when he reached a higher level of enlightenment would he have more authority to speak. When that time came, there would naturally not be too many restrictions when doing things. But before that, he had to endure it. No matter how many variables and provocations there were, he had to be a coward. Right now, Xiaoyang was a little stumped as well. Seemed like there were still some discrepancies in the intel. As for why Shingongqi had become like this, he wasn't sure either. In fact, Xiaoyang had started to plan again. Since the variable had appeared, he naturally had to make some changes to his plan. Otherwise, his original plan might cause him to make some mistakes. Princess Mingzhu glanced at Xiaoyang. She also felt that it was strange. She couldn't say for sure what the situation was like. In fact, she didn't even know what to do next. Shingongqi was also a little stumped. Seeing that the two of them didn't speak for a long time and even looked confused, he felt even more helpless. Regarding the situation, many thoughts flashed through Shingongqi's mind, but they were all interrupted in the end. That was because the so-called proof was too little. It was hard to explain or explain. As such, this matter naturally became even more difficult to understand. Shingongqi also felt that this was a conspiracy, so he didn't dare to act rashly to avoid giving others a reason to criticize him. Since the other party had used such a despicable method to deal with him, it meant that they were afraid. As such, as long as he didn't attack, everything would be fine. Even if he did attack, he had to control it well. He couldn't end up in a situation where he would fight to the death. It doesn't matter who we are, Xiaoyang said coldly. When Shingongqi heard this, he snorted. Immediately, the thoughts in his mind became more active. At the same time, the anger in his heart became even more difficult to suppress. After all, there were too many variables. He didn't dare to act rashly. However, the anger made Shingongqi almost lose his mind. Speak quickly. Otherwise, if you lose your lives, you can only regret it when you go to hell. Shingongqi scolded angrily. Now he was almost on the verge of collapse. These little guys had been probing and provoking him. Xiaoyang could only smile bitterly. He did not know what was wrong with the multicolor tribe's almighty. However, he could read some other information from this reaction. For example, although the multicolor tribe was one of the 10 great tribes, the situation they were facing now was very bad. After all, the killing within the Wanshou realm had never stopped. Perhaps Shingongqi had gotten wind of something, which was why he was so careful. Because of this, Xiaoyang had no choice but to reconsider. However, he didn't get any relevant information from blind left and blind right. Therefore, he couldn't tell what the situation was exactly. As long as you hand over your head, I'll tell you, Xiaoyang suddenly said with a cold expression. Originally, he wanted to get some information out of them and beat them at their own game. However, after thinking about it, he realized that it was almost impossible. Therefore, directly enraging the other party seemed to be the safest thing to do. If he thought too much, he would only leave trouble for himself in the future. These things couldn't be hesitated. As soon as he said this, the anger in Shingongqi's heart could no longer be suppressed. He felt that it would be meaningless if he continued to endure the provocation of these juniors to such an extent. Even if he knew that this was most likely a scheme of his opponent, he still had to take action. However, Princess Mingzhu was one step faster. She directly drew her sword. Instantly, countless golden sword qi rained down and attacked Qi. Chapter 24:13. Princess Mingzhu had also suppressed her temperament for a long time. She had also wanted to figure out what was going on. However, Xiaoyang had already expressed his stance, so there was no need to continue waiting. Moreover, she did not know how long the formation could last, so it was better to end the battle quickly. As for whether there would be any changes, she would think about it later. At least, she had to kill the opponent first to prevent any undue delay. Qi looked at the golden sword rain that filled the sky, and he could not help but frown. When he looked at the veiled woman again, he could not help but be shocked. This was because he felt something strange. In the entire Wanshou realm, there were very few people who used swords. Those who could easily wield their swords were pitifully few. In fact, those who were able to call each other by their names were well aware of each other's identities. Furthermore, it was impossible for those powerful beings to be as relaxed as this woman. Suddenly, Qi was able to confirm that this woman did not belong to the 10 great tribes. She might not even be from the Wanshou realm. Thinking like this, Qi also understood. The other party was indeed here to cause trouble. No, they were here to seek death. You're from the Four-Realm Alliance. Qi suddenly shouted. Some time ago, Qi had received news from his elders that they were gathering an army and preparing to invade a new realm. It was rumored that the other world had some strength, causing the White Bear tribe to suffer a setback, losing soldiers and generals, greatly damaging their vitality. For this, Qi clapped his hands and cheered. The grudge between the multicolor tribe and the White Bear tribe could be said to have existed for a long time. However, due to some rules, they could not start a war to clear up these matters. However, now that they knew what was going on, it was easy to deal with it. To be able to have such strength, this was the only explanation. However, what Qi did not expect was that these two fellows came to find trouble with him first, and not the White Bear tribe. You're really arrogant. You dare to come here to kill me. Qi snorted coldly and said with slight disdain. Being able to confirm the other party's identity, Qi finally felt relieved. As long as the other tribes of the Myriad Beast realm did not set him up, he would be fine. Now, Qi wanted to experience how powerful the cultivators of the Four Realms Alliance were. Even the White Bear tribe was defeated by them. At the same time, Qi immediately swam towards Princess Mingzhu. As for the rain of swords above his head, was it even worth mentioning? As long as he dodged it, why would he need to meet it head-on? Seeing this, Princess Mingzhu did not cower in the slightest. In fact, his attacks were even more ruthless. In an instant, the sword aura around him became even purer. Since they were going to meet force with force, she wasn't afraid. At the same time, she wanted to see how far she was from a fifth-order martial emperor. Xiaoyang, on the other hand, stood to the side with his sword in hand. He didn't make any moves at all and just watched quietly. Because of the difference of 2 realms, it was difficult for him to fight him head-on. Therefore, the only thing he could do was to use other means to make the other party feel troubled. The main attacker this time was Princess Mingzhu. As for how to help, Xiaoyang had no choice but to think about it. After all, it wasn't easy to trap such a powerful person. Come, Qi shouted. At the same time, a disdainful smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. He didn't understand either. This girl actually wanted to meet him head-on? If this wasn't courting death, then what was it? Did she really think that just because she was a genius of her own world, she could be so arrogant and casually challenge someone of a higher realm? Speaking of top geniuses, Qi had also stunned the entire beast realm in the past. To be able to reach such a level, who would be an ordinary person without any outstanding talent. Facing the endless sword aura, Qi appeared very calm. In his opinion, as long as he waved his hand, he would be able to completely annihilate it. Everything was just a matter of a wave of his hand. Sometimes there was no need to think too much. He just needed to make a move. At this moment, the atmosphere became very oppressive. The confrontation between the two could be said to be like a needle against an awl, making people nervous. The golden sword aura from before kept falling, stabbing into the mountain peak, causing smoke and dust to rise. A new round of competition had also completely begun. Shingongqi's hands kept waving, and suddenly, rays of sharp light kept condensing. Every ray of light that rushed forward was unstoppable. Sword Qi was constantly being cut apart. Seeing this scene, Princess Mingzhu couldn't help but gasp subconsciously. Shingongqi was indeed worthy of being in the top 10 of the beast realm. Before his attack, even Princess Mingzhu, who was known as the #1 person in the 3,000 small worlds, seemed a little inferior. Of course, this was mainly due to the difference in their realms. If their realms were the same, it would be hard to say who would be overshadowed in front of the other. Princess Mingzhu didn't show the slightest cowardice. Instead, the more she fought, the braver she became, and the more powerful the sword aura bloomed in her eyes. For such a tyrannical opponent, it could be said that he was an existence that could only be encountered by chance. Therefore, this was also a very important part of her cultivation. All along, Princess Mingzhu felt that there was a gap between her and Xiaoyang. It was completely because she had experienced too few life and death battles, which was why it was like that. As long as she experienced more and completely adapted to it, these problems would be perfectly solved. At that time, once the gap was closed, she would still be the strongest person in the younger generation. Xiaoyang didn't know how many thoughts Princess Mingzhu had in this moment. He only watched all of Shingongqi's movements and, at the same time, paid attention to the situation outside the mountain peak. Fortunately, everything was still within his expectations, which made him feel much more at ease. However, how to decide the next battle situation had become a big problem. After all, a battle of this level had already caused a huge commotion. It would not be an easy task to completely change the situation. It was very difficult to combine so many things and do it perfectly. Moreover, if there was a mistake in a certain part, he might have to pay an even more tragic price because of it. Therefore, Xiaoyang still wasn't sure what to do next. However, the plan in his heart could be said to be constantly changing. It seemed that every plan could succeed, but it could also fail. Chapter 24:14. Therefore, Xiaoyang was under a lot of pressure. It seemed that no matter what he did, it would be difficult to achieve a perfect result. Therefore, he had no choice but to think about what method he should use to control everything in his own hands. However, sometimes thinking too much doesn't have much effect, because the situation is always changing. Sometimes the strategy you've planned for a long time can be ruined because of a small change. Then, Xiaoyang stopped thinking about it. He held the sword in his hand horizontally, and his entire body began to accumulate energy. Since he was going to fight, there was no need to find an excuse to wait. At least when he was waiting, he had to be fully prepared. Only with sufficient preparation would one be able to grasp the opportunity when it presented itself. If he kept thinking about things, most of his energy would be wasted. "You're only SOSO," Shingongqi said coldly. He watched as his sharp blade continuously broke through the opponent's sword energy. Although there were many losses in the process, the gap between the two of them had already been revealed. The gap between the realms, even if you were extremely talented, was difficult to overcome. However, Princess Mingzhu was not afraid at all. She continued to charge forward as if she didn't know what fear was. Today, she only knew one thing, and that was to defeat her opponent. Only then could she achieve her goal. As for the process and the price she would have to pay, she didn't care. After all, when they stepped onto the path of invading the Wanshou realm, they had already disregarded life and death. If someone was afraid of death, then in front of such a huge gap, they might really die. On the other hand, if they were to risk everything, they might be able to fight their way out. As for whether they could succeed or not, it would depend on how they handled the situation. If they handled it well, they could do whatever they wanted. If they made a mistake, only death would await them. Of course, there were countless cases of survival. They just didn't know if they could do it. Back then, Princess Ming Zhu also challenged Bai Cheng. There were many reasons why they were able to fight to a draw. For example, Bai Cheng was afraid of death, and his old age had caused his strength to decline. That was why they were locked in a stalemate. Compared to that old man, Qi was much more powerful. Moreover, he was young and could even be said to be in his prime. That was why she was at a disadvantage when the battle started. Challenging someone of a higher level was a risky attempt in the first place. If one was careless, they might really be consigned to eternal damnation. The distance between the two of them was getting closer and closer, and some of the blade-like rays of light had even reached her, continuously cutting through her protective magic tools. Suddenly, Qi's smile became much more sinister. He could already imagine what kind of painful expression this woman would have after being ravaged by him. At that time, the gloominess in his heart would be swept away. In this short period of time, Qi had already analyzed a lot of information. This woman was so valiant. She was most likely the rumored Princess Mingzhu. Until now, Qi still couldn't figure out how useless that old man Bai Cheng was to be able to be beaten by her. In Qi's eyes, Bai Cheng was now like a joke. Princess Mingzhu suddenly shouted in a low voice. Suddenly, the sword in her hand turned, and an even more powerful sword qi was slashed out. When the sword qi fell, the blade-like aura was cut in half one after another. It was very powerful. Seeing this scene, Qi couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Then he came back to his senses. This woman was indeed extraordinary. Her strength was so strong that it made people look askance. But so what? The situation had long been decided. No matter how you struggled, it would be difficult to change it. No matter how strong you were, that was all you could do. He was Qi, not Bai Cheng. With a roar, Qi's speed suddenly increased. He immediately punched out, and a fist intent directly hit the sword qi. Under this punch, the sword qi directly stopped and then began to shatter. Go to hell! Qi shouted angrily and punched again. Immediately, Princess Mingzhu used all her strength to protect the sword in front of her. Only then could she block the punch and not be hit hard. If it wasn't for the sword blocking the punch, Princess Mingzhu would have been seriously injured by the punch. At this moment, Xiaoyang, who was still waiting, made his move. Lightning prison, true fire kill. In an instant, countless thunderbolts appeared around Qi. In the blink of an eye, they formed a huge net. It looked indestructible and difficult to open. Qi looked at the thunderbolts around him and couldn't help but frown, because he was still familiar with this kind of power. However, Xiaoyang was a human cultivator and not a member of the White Bear tribe. Qi also felt the power of this lightning net. Soon after, he let out an explosive roar, and the power in his body surged out. It seemed that he didn't put these methods in his eyes at all. Xiaoyang also wielded his divine sword and transformed into a streak of fiery light as he charged forward. At this moment, he didn't seem to be afraid anymore. Qi couldn't help but be shocked by this sudden change. He looked at the youth with the weakest cultivation level, yet he still had the guts to attack. This was a rare thing. After a few punches, Qi punched several holes in the lightning net. However, the lightning net didn't shatter and continued to shrink. Qi couldn't help but be shocked. This kind of martial skill was so tough that it didn't shatter under such a powerful force. At this moment, many thoughts flashed through Qi's mind. However, he quickly dismissed them. There were indeed too many possibilities, so Qi could only keep them in his heart. Since that brat dared to come, he would let his opponent taste the sharpness of his claws. In the next moment, Qi directly slapped out with his palm. That palm directly turned into a huge claw. The claw was extremely sharp. It was as if it could directly melt the mountain. Qi didn't have a good impression of Xiaoyang. He even wanted to kill him. As long as he could kill him, why would he need to spend so much energy? Facing such an attack, Xiaoyang still didn't have any intention of retreating. Instead, his attacks became even stronger. Since he wanted to fight, how could he be afraid? Moreover, he wanted to try whether this sword strike could succeed. Chapter 24:15. The corner of Qi's eyes twitched when he saw the sword Qi approaching. He didn't expect this young man to act like he was ready to die. This caused him to be extremely shocked. Could it be that there was something wrong with these human cultivators' brains? Was that why they were so arrogant? For a moment, Qi found it hard to understand what these people were thinking. On the contrary, they were even more powerful than ferocious beasts. Even now, Qi was doubting himself. Who was the vicious and brutal one here? At the very least, from the looks of it, he was still at a disadvantage. Of course, Qi was more calm than anything else. He felt that victory was already in his grasp, so he didn't need to worry too much. Everything was going according to his control, so these things would naturally become easier. Moreover, he hadn't fought for a long time. Why wouldn't he do it if he could vent his anger? Xiaoyang also felt the immense pressure, but he still did not have the slightest intention of retreating. After all, he was already at a disadvantage in terms of cultivation. If he lost to his opponent in terms of aura, it would be difficult to fight. Therefore, he had to be more ruthless and make his opponent afraid. When Qi saw that Xiaoyang didn't have any intention of retreating, he didn't feel uncomfortable at all. Instead, he smiled proudly. It was said that human cultivators were resourceful, and their thoughts were even more unfathomable. However, it seemed that some of them weren't very smart. At least, the person in front of him was like that. He knew that he would die if he continued to charge forward, but he still did so. Speaking of which, this was normal. Even fools had different thoughts. All of a sudden, Xiaoyang's speed suddenly increased. Suddenly, Qi couldn't help but be stunned. He didn't expect such an unforeseen event to occur. For a moment, he turned pale with fright. Fortunately, everything could be made up for and saved. At that moment, Qi realized that if he underestimated anyone, he would have to pay an extremely heavy price for it. Therefore, even with the suppression of cultivation, he couldn't be careless. Otherwise, his opponent's attack might be extremely powerful. In fact, he might not even be able to hold on any longer. Regarding this, Qi could only admit defeat. Underestimating one's opponent was a taboo in a big battle. He had been too careless. The sword Qi had already arrived, and Qi also felt an incomparable burning pain coming from his body. At the same time, his other hand also reached out and transformed into a huge claw, charging directly at Xiaoyang's abdomen. Qi! The sword and the sharp claws pierced into each other's bodies at the same time. Even though Xiaoyang had a breath of will Qi to protect his body, it was still difficult for him to resist such sharp claws. His defense was broken and his body was pierced. Qi lowered his head in a daze. He looked at the sharp sword in his chest and the countless flaming sword energies that were invading his body. He immediately became furious. Who would have thought that someone as wise as him would actually be schemed against by this brat? As expected, human cultivators had many schemes and plots. You think you can beat me like this? Qi roared angrily and immediately slapped Xiaoyang's head with his other hand. Obviously, he was prepared to kill this young man who offended him with this slap. Xiaoyang naturally knew that if this claw really landed on his head, even if he didn't die, he would probably lose his ability to fight. At that time, both he and Princess Mingzhu might die here. Thinking of this, how could Xiaoyang be willing? Therefore, he also suddenly retreated and allowed his body to be pulled out of the sharp claws, causing intense pain. He was still able to endure such intense pain, but if this claw really hit him, then his life would really be in danger. he still knew what was more important and what was more important. After this claw missed, Shingongqi's anger soared to the sky. He felt as if he had been played, and he was very unhappy. However, in the next moment, Shingongqi also felt a sense of danger coming at him again. Suddenly, his expression changed drastically. This was because what he felt was a raging fire. In the blink of an eye, Xiao suddenly appeared and wrapped around him like a fire python. Back then, Xiaoyang thought for a long time and finally decided to bring Xiaohu along. Xiaohu's strength was comparable to a 4th-level martial king cultivator. If it was used well, it might have an extraordinary effect. Now was a great opportunity and it had succeeded. At this moment, Princess Mingzhu immediately slashed out with her sword and charged toward Shingongqi. Now, Princess Mingzhu's thoughts were very simple. That was to directly kill her opponent when the opportunity presented itself. This was the only way to prevent future troubles. As for other things, she would think about it later. This was an opportunity that Xiaoyang had fought for with his life. How could she miss it? At this moment, Shingongqi's heart had already started to panic. This was because he never thought that this would happen. He had never imagined that the plan of these two youngsters would actually be so meticulous. Their moves were even more closely linked, and they had almost taken his life. Thinking of this, Shingongqi's heart became more and more furious. Of course, he also praised them. It was not without reason that the two of them were able to defend against the White Bear tribe's attack. If they did not have enough strength, how could they defend against it? Blind Left and Blind Right, who were watching the battle from outside the mountain peak, were also dumbfounded. In the beginning, everything was going according to their plan. Although Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu were tyrannical, in front of the huge gap in strength, they would always be suppressed. However, Xiaoyang's sudden attack, as if he did not care about his life, directly broke the stalemate. In fact, it even caused more variables to appear in this battle. There were many possibilities, which made people unable to help but praise him. Even Blind Right, who had always liked to fight fiercely, felt a bit ashamed. It was difficult for him to attack as recklessly as Xiaoyang. As for Blind Left, there was an even greater change in his eyes. That was admiration and admiration. Xiaoyang seemed to be rash, but he had probably already calculated it. He wanted to use himself as the precondition to make a comeback. Chapter 24:16. If he paid too much attention to his own safety, he would not be satisfied with the final result. After all, he would not take any risks under the premise of ensuring his own safety. If that was the case, how could he have a chance when he faced an opponent who was much stronger than him? Since there was no chance, he could only create it himself. Riches and honor came from danger. It was the same principle. Sometimes, if you risked your life, there might be some unexpected surprises. If you were hesitant and did not dare to take the risk, you would definitely die. Now, Blind's was admiration for Lu Xian grew. It was hard for him to imagine how much courage and self-control Xiaoyang had to have in order to be able to do this. Although he could understand many of the details, it was difficult to experience. In fact, it was almost impossible for them to do so. The more he thought about it, the more shocked Blind Left was. Xiaoyang's seemingly suicidal actions had caused a change in the situation that was originally a sure-death situation. What a good method! Amazing! Blind Left exclaimed. Right Blind also nodded in succession. He could not help but clap as well. He felt that such a method was indeed incomparably shocking. Such a crazy method could be said to be praiseworthy. If he could be so ruthless, he would not have been controlled by others all the time. Blind Left smiled helplessly and bitterly as he thought about this. Looks like we made the right bet this time. I wonder how chaotic the Wanshou realm will be. How far can the two of us bring our own tribes? Zui Sun thought and smiled bitterly in helplessness. With their current strength, they could barely be considered as a top existence if they joined forces. However, the 10 great clans were still out of their reach. If they rashly started a war, it would be difficult for them to fight back. Of course, if the 10 great tribes suffered enough losses and many experts died, the Grey Wolf tribe would still have a chance. Putting everything else aside, if he could take over all of the multicolored tribe's territory, it would be a great thing for Blindswa. Moreover, their tribe would become stronger because of the increase of the territory. After all, the territory also brought resources. If there were enough resources, one could continuously create experts. Now, Blind Left and Blind Right were looking forward to it. They even hoped that Xiaoyang could defeat more tribes and make it difficult for them to establish themselves among the top 10 tribes. At that time, they would experience some chaos, and their day of success would arrive. However, these ideas were somewhat unrealistic because this was only the last of the 10 major tribes. Xiaoyang had to use such a method to deal with them. If they were to face a stronger tribe, would this method still work? Naturally, the answer to this question was obvious. At the very least, Blindswa felt that it was unrealistic. Therefore, he could only have some hope in his heart. Aren't we being too selfish by doing this? Blindswa suddenly turned around and asked. Right Blind frowned. He immediately waved his hand and said, Hasn't our 1,000-beast world always been like this? Zhuoxiong frowned slightly when he heard these words. He immediately laughed bitterly in a somewhat helpless manner. Yes, the 1,000-beast world had always been like this. They only wanted to become stronger. As for the survival of the other tribes, if there were no interests involved, what did it have to do with them? The 1,000-beast world seemed to be united in external battles, but internally it had always been a plate of loose sand. In fact, they had never stopped attacking each other. Thinking of this, Blind Left became somewhat melancholic. Faintly, he felt that this method was indeed somewhat inappropriate. Then, Blind Left dispersed all the thoughts in his heart. Now was not the time to be sentimental. Looking at the battle situation was the most important thing. Facing Princess Mingzhu's sword, Shingongqi turned pale with fright. Such a series of attacks caused his attitude to change once again. The sword qi that was rushing toward him made him even more terrified. If the other party's rhythm continued like this, there was a possibility that they might really fail miserably. As Shingongqi thought of this, the fear in his heart increased a little. At this moment, Shingongqi no longer cared about Xiaohua, who was entangling him. He roared and waved his claws continuously. Countless wind blades rapidly formed and charged toward Princess Mingzhu at an extremely fast speed. Shingongqi's thoughts were very simple. That was, he had to break the current situation first. At least, he could not always be under the control of his opponent. Sometimes it would not matter even if he had to pay a price. Otherwise, it would be a very terrifying thing to be led by the nose by his opponent. It was very likely that he would even lose his life because of this. As a mighty 5th-level martial emperor, if he was killed by the joint forces of 2 young juniors, this matter would probably become a joke. Shingongqi had his own pride. How could he become the laughingstock of others? Therefore, he was very clear about what he was thinking in his heart. Princess Mingzhu looked at the wind blades that kept attacking her, even though she knew that she would inevitably be injured if she forced her way through. However, she still did not choose to retreat. Since Xiaoyang could fight with his life to break the situation, why couldn't she do the same? If one wanted to achieve great things, if one was not willing to make any sacrifices, then why bother planning? Therefore, this kind of thing only required a firm mind. At worst, she would just give up her life here. As long as she could kill her opponent, that would be enough. Being afraid of the slightest thing was not Princess Mingzhu's fighting style. Therefore, she had already ignored all the confusion. Seeing the woman charge at him like a madwoman, Shingongqi was furious. He roared and suddenly increased his speed. In an instant, he had returned to the mountain peak. Under that sword, the entire mountain peak shook. Countless sword qi pierced the towering mountain peak, causing it to be even more devastated. There were small cracks everywhere. At the same time, countless wind blades slashed across Princess Mingju's body, leaving behind streaks of blood. Qi, who was standing on the mountain peak, roared in anger. Immediately, a majestic power surged out, forcing Xiaohua to be unable to continue entangling him. He had no choice but to temporarily retreat, not daring to be in a stalemate. Chapter 24:17. Xiao Yang stood there and turned a blind eye to the hole in his chest. It was as if he had completely ignored it. Although he had used a secret technique to block the holes and stop the blood from flowing out, the pain was real. Even though Xiao Yang's willpower was as strong as iron, his brows were still furrowed together. He was in great pain. He originally wanted to follow up with another attack, but because of the holes, the flow of spiritual power was not smooth. As such, he could only stand there and suppress it. Princess Mingzhu stood on the mountainside and frowned slightly. She still turned a blind eye to the bloodstains on her body. This was because their eyes were only on the high and mighty Qi. Their current thoughts were very similar, and that was to think of a way to kill him. However, they had a great opportunity just now, but because they did not plan it well enough, they did not succeed. This made the two of them feel somewhat regretful. They had to admit that they had indeed underestimated their opponent's strength. However, they did not regret it because they were not strong enough that they made these mistakes. The gap in strength was difficult to make up for, and sometimes it could not be completely closed with brains. Instead of regretting why they could not take down their opponent, it was better to think about what to do next. Just now, they were not able to kill Qi, which had already alerted the enemy and made him aware of their strength. Therefore, Qi would not be careless in the slightest. Therefore, the number of flaws that would be exposed would be even fewer. Their chances would become almost zero because of this. Qi's gaze changed once again as he looked down. This was because this battle, in his opinion, was an existence akin to extraordinary shame and humiliation. He was forced into this situation by two juniors. It was like a disgrace, and it was difficult to accept. Fortunately, after fighting for so long, no one noticed the situation here. Otherwise, if his fellow clansmen were to see this, his image would be completely destroyed. Now, Qi was thinking about how he should deal with the attacks of these two people. Previously, he did not have to worry about these problems at all because they were meaningless to him. However, now he had to be more cautious. After all, the lesson of the past was still in front of them. Qi had no choice but to carefully examine his opponents now. Their cultivation levels might not be high, but their strength was extremely tyrannical. Of course, the most important thing was the momentum of not caring about one's life. This was the most frightening part. "I really underestimated you," Qi said hatefully. Now, Qi finally understood why Bai Xingyun and Bai Cheng were defeated in the flowing cloud realm. In the face of such a ruthless and scheming opponent, the slightest carelessness would lead to eternal damnation. Therefore, this was within the normal range. However, Qi was still somewhat unhappy in his heart. He felt that this was truly unbearable. Xiao Yang and Princess Mingzhu didn't say anything. They only looked at each other and understood each other's thoughts. The two of them held their swords and prepared to launch the next attack. After all, it was impossible for them to stop before the victor was decided. Of course, under this attack, they were unable to kill Qi. The next time they came, the multicolored tribe would most likely have already set up an inescapable net. There might even be powerhouses from other tribes coming to help. That was completely possible. Therefore, under all these prerequisites, they were bound to succeed this time. If they failed, there would be endless trouble in the future. At this moment, Xiaohua was also eager to give it a try. If an opportunity presented itself, it would also pounce at the first moment. If it could directly devour a 5th-level martial emperor almighty, then Xiaohua's strength would also be greatly replenished. Therefore, in this battle, Xiaohua also seemed to be working extra hard. To Xiaohua, A powerful body of strength was a real delicacy. It made him drool endlessly, seeing that the murderous aura of the two people had not dissipated and that they were even prepared to continue fighting without caring about their own injuries. Shingon became even more furious. "Since you want to die, then I'll fulfill your wish," Shingon said and roared angrily. Immediately, an extremely powerful roar was heard. Even the entire mountain peak trembled because of it. In an instant, Shingon revealed his true form. Shingon turned into a leopard. He looked even more vigorous and burly. His body was 10 meters long, almost no different from a small mountain peak. The leopard's posture was like a fierce tiger coming down from the mountain. It glared at the two people covetously. It was constantly accumulating power, preparing to launch an attack. There were several strange patterns on Shingon body. They looked quite mysterious. In the end, the origin of the name Multicolor Tribe was because of the patterns on their tribe's true form. These patterns looked ordinary, but there was a profound mystery hidden within them. In the blink of an eye, a mysterious light appeared on the patterns. Now, Shingon was completely filled with killing intent. He also knew very well that if he wanted to take down these two lunatics in their human form, he would probably have to pay a higher price. However, if he used his true form to fight and his strength was no longer suppressed, then this matter would become much simpler. Shingon circled around the mountain as if he was looking down on the world. It was as if everything in front of him could no longer enter his eyes. He was looking down on the world. When Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu saw this, they could only sigh helplessly. They did not expect that after delaying until now, the worst situation still happened. As such, if they still wanted to kill their opponents, they would probably have to use more methods. Perhaps they would have to pay a higher price. In the next moment, Shingon roared angrily and disappeared on the spot. It was as if he had disappeared without a trace. So fast! Princess Mingzhu sighed in her heart. She did not dare to hesitate at all and directly slashed with her sword based on her intuition. Immediately, the sword light shone brightly, and an extremely powerful sword soared into the sky. It was like a storm of pear blossoms sprinkling down. In the next moment, there was a furious roar. The layers of sword were actually shaken to a standstill. Even Princess Mingzhu could not help but be stunned. By the time she reacted, a bloody mouth had already appeared in front of her. Shingon bit down as if he wanted to swallow her alive. Chapter 24:18. Shingon was a leopard, and his talent gave him unparalleled speed. Princess Mingzhu did not panic in the face of such a swift attack. She slashed out with her sword again, and instantly, a dazzling sword light burst out as if it was unstoppable. Just a glance at it was enough to make people fearful and terrified. Although Princess Mingzhu was only in the 4th level of the Martial King realm, the killing power of her attack was not to be ignored. For example, the power of this attack was even more terrifying. Even though Shingon revealed his true form, he still did not dare to take the attack head-on. If he were to really eat this sword, then his tongue would probably be directly cut off. His entire mouth would be filled with sword and his head might explode. The power of this attack was so terrifying that no matter how high one's cultivation level was, one would not dare to take it head-on. Therefore, Shingon attack was only halfway through before he had to retreat. His figure flashed and was extremely fast. Seeing Shingon figure suddenly disappear, Princess Mingzhu simply closed her eyes. Since her eyes could not see his speed and movements clearly, there was no need to continue searching. Sometimes perception was very real. As long as she could sense the direction of his attack, she could counterattack. If he continued to rely on his eyes to look, he was afraid that the results would not be too good. It might even cause his mind to become confused. Therefore, this method could be said to be the safest way to proceed. "Found you!" Princess Mingzhu let out a low cry and immediately swung the sword in her hand once again. Immediately, layers of sword qi continued to attack. She was like a warrior charging into battle, pressing forward courageously. However, in the next moment, Princess Mingzhu felt a huge force attacking her. She did not care much and immediately turned her sword. However, in the next moment, she could no longer control her body and was sent flying. Xiao Yang stood on the side and watched. He was extremely shocked. He did not expect this animal to be so fast. Even he was a little dazzled when he saw all this. A fifth-level martial king realm powerhouse might not have much of an advantage in terms of absolute strength. However, with such speed, even cultivators of the same level would have a headache. At the same time, Xiaohua had already moved. He blocked in front of Princess Mingzhu so that Shingongqi could not continue to push his luck. With Shingongqi's speed, if he did not stop Xiaohua, Princess Mingzhu would be severely injured in a few breaths' time. She might even lose her life. Earlier, Shingongqi had already tasted Xiaohua's prowess. He did not dare to meet Xiaohua head-on and could only resentfully retreat. Otherwise, if he was entangled with Xiaohua, it would be an extremely terrible thing for him. As a result, after Shingongqi's attack was interrupted, he was furious. However, he had already started to look for his next attack. Shingongqi was prepared to be ruthless towards these two human cultivators. After all, according to the intelligence, the two of them were the top generals of the World Alliance, and they even had extremely brilliant leadership skills. If the two of them were killed, the multicolor tribe would be able to take advantage of the Four Realms Alliance's share of the benefits to be divided among them. Xiao Yang was still very calm. At the same time, he was thinking of many ways. However, for now, it was almost impossible to trap Shingongqi and make him lose his advantage in speed. Therefore, what to do next became the number one problem. Xiao Yang had previously estimated and analyzed according to the intelligence. However, when it came to the scene, the previous analysis was somewhat weak. It was not even very useful. Thinking about this, Xiao Yang felt very helpless in his heart. Who would have thought that things would change so quickly? He even felt that he was caught off guard. In the end, he had underestimated his opponent's ability. That was why there was such a dangerous situation and stalemate. Weren't you very powerful before? Why don't you dare to fight with your life now? Why? Are you afraid because you know that you'll lose your life if you continue to fight? Shingongqi said and laughed ferociously. In the beginning, Xiao Yang fought with his life as soon as he came up. This shocked Shingongqi. He even felt some fear. However, now it seemed that it was just an illusion. The other party dared to be so bold because they were within the range of his estimation. If they exceeded the range of his estimation, they would be nothing more than soft-footed shrimps. They were not worth mentioning. It could be said that after Shingongqi revealed his true form, the situation of the battle had changed dramatically. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was a one-sided suppression. Xiao Yang, on the other hand, was frowning because he had yet to come up with a suitable countermeasure in his heart. That was why he appeared so helpless now. However, since he had already come this far, he had no way out. The only thing he could do was to continue fighting and even kill his opponent here. However, this idea was very simple. It would be difficult to do it. Princess Mingzhu did not look at the huge bloody wound on her arm. She only frowned. Now, she realized that the opponent she was facing was very different from the White Bear tribe. If she continued to fight using the previous method, she would only die in the end. Therefore, she had to change the strategy she had set before. If she was alone, Princess Mingzhu would feel a little weak and think that it would be difficult to defeat Shingongqi. However, she had Xiao Yang by her side now. This showed her confidence. Soon after, Princess Mingzhu swung the sword in her hand. Immediately, her aura surged and exploded once again. She still had an unstoppable stance. At the same time, Shingongqi also felt this change. He snorted in disdain and slowly walked forward. Shingongqi's aura was also rising. He knew that human cultivators were very cunning. They might have some tricks up their sleeves. If he made a mistake, he would fall into their trap. Therefore, he attacked with all his strength. As long as they died, there would be no more accidents. In the next moment, the strange patterns on Shingongqi's body seemed to come alive. They were overflowing with light. It was very mysterious. Gale, wild leopard kill. Chapter 24:19. Shingongqi didn't know what the waiting young man was plotting, but if he could kill the other first, then there was no mistake about it. In the next moment, Shingongqi disappeared from where he stood. In an instant, Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu both sensed the smell of blood. Shingongqi had made his move, and he was prepared to use his special skill. At this moment, Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu both felt the killing intent, and they couldn't help but look at each other. They didn't have the chance to continue thinking, so they could only fight with their lives on the line in this bitter battle. Their previous strategy seemed to be useless now, and it wasn't of much use at all. However, this couldn't be helped. After all, they had to pay the price for underestimating the other party's ability. Xiaoyang gritted his teeth and slashed with his sword, and his figure became extremely fast. Thunder, lightning, fire, sweep. Since the other party had already made his move, Xiaoyang could only force his way through. Moreover, he could tell that Shingongqi wanted to get rid of Princess Mingzhu, who was the biggest threat to him. In this battle, if he wanted to kill Shingongqi, he would have to rely on Princess Mingzhu's ability to a large extent. Therefore, he had to block this attack and give Princess Mingzhu a chance to counterattack. Halfway through, a terrifying thought flashed through Xiaoyang's mind. However, in the blink of an eye, his brows were filled with determination. He had never been a hesitant person, so now that he had made a decision, even if he was going to die, he had to hold on. At the same time, Xiaohu also quickly changed his position and cooperated with Xiaoyang. When he blocked in front of Princess Mingzhu, Xiaoyang also felt wind blades continuously sweep past him. In fact, when he was careless, a few wounds would appear on his body for no apparent reason. Even though it was just the power, it was already so terrifying. Princess Mingzhu looked at the determined figure and frowned slightly. She didn't understand why he had to do this. However, in the blink of an eye, she understood that she had to do this. Since Xiaoyang was willing to pay the price, she couldn't hesitate. She had created this opportunity with great difficulty, so she naturally had to grasp it tightly in her hands. Waiting for an opportunity was the helplessness of the weak. Only by taking the initiative to create an opportunity could the weaker side have a chance to kill the other side. Being afraid of the slightest thing had never been their style, so Princess Mingzhu already knew what to do next. In the blink of an eye, the sword in Princess Mingzhu's hand released a dazzling sword light. At this point, she couldn't continue hesitating. Therefore, this time, she needed to be even more ruthless and use all her skills. When Shingongqi saw Xiaoyang rushing over without any regard for his life, he couldn't help but feel astonished. Could it be that the ways of the world had changed? Were human cultivators even more ferocious and fearless than ferocious beasts? In Shingongqi's eyes, Xiaoyang's attack was simply throwing an egg at a rock and seeking his own death. This young man wasn't stupid, but he still came to die. This was thought-provoking. Shingongqi didn't want to think too much about it. No matter how many schemes you had, as long as I killed you with this move, all of your schemes would become nothing and be useless. After making up his mind, Shingongqi's attacks became even more ruthless. Countless forces madly gathered together with his master. Xiaoyang took a deep breath and gathered his will. He wanted to use this to block these injuries. Otherwise, if he ate all these forces, even if he didn't die, it would be difficult for him to stand up again. Even though his body was very tough, it was still difficult for him to completely block them. Sometimes reality was just that cruel. No matter how strong you were, when you faced an even stronger opponent, it would be difficult for you to resist. When the sword slashed out, its power was almost exhausted, but it only managed to clear away the wind blades. The The killing move was still in Shingongqi's hands. Die. Shingongqi roared angrily and slammed down with his claw. If this claw really landed, Xiao Yang's head would probably explode. However, there was some throbbing in the space because of this. One could even see the ripples spreading out layer by layer like water ripples. Greater teleportation technique. Shingongqi's claw was trapped in the mysterious space and couldn't be pulled out for a while. At this moment, he panicked. Shingongqi didn't know what was going on. In fact, he was even more bewildered in his heart. What exactly was going on? He couldn't think clearly and couldn't understand. At least in his heart, he was already very shocked. This situation had already completely exceeded his expectations. Thunder prison. Xiao Yang let out a low roar and slashed out again. The surrounding lightning appeared and turned into an inescapable net that quickly shrunk. Since you're fast enough, as long as you're trapped here, you can only be trampled on. As long as I take all your advantages, you won't be able to continue being fierce. In the next moment, Xiao Hu also passed through the layers of lightning net and covered Shingongqi's body, starting to burn fiercely. Shingongqi cried out in pain. He never thought that he would be trapped by a cultivator 2 realms lower than him. How was this possible? Immediately, Shingongqi's other claw slammed down, but Xiao Yang used the Thunder Fire Divine sword to block it. One claw was restricted by the miraculous space, while the other claw was blocked. Now, Shingongqi's heart was in a state of panic. Never in his wildest dreams would he have imagined that this young cultivator would be so powerful. All of this made people feel a little incredulous. At least Shingongqi found it hard to accept. Suddenly, Shingongqi roared and opened his bloody mouth. Immediately, countless wind blades spewed out along with the smell of blood. Xiao Yang found it hard to withstand that breath of will, and his body was instantly pierced by the will. However, the young man didn't even frown in the face of such an attack. He knew very well that as long as he could trap Shingongqi here for a moment, he would be able to win. At the same time, Princess Mingzhu, who was accumulating power in the back, finished her attack. Instantly, sword light shone brightly. Golden Edge 10,000 slaughter. Chapter 2420. In the next moment, a gigantic sword chi appeared above Shingongqi's head and crashed down. The sword chi shone with endless golden light. Just a glance was enough to dazzle people. The coldness that came from his life made Shingongqi seem as if he had gone crazy. He was constantly struggling, trying to escape from this place. However, the 3 locks made it impossible for him to break free. Moreover, Xiao Yang allowed his injuries to become more and more serious. He did not retreat at all. Since he created such an opportunity with all his strength, he naturally had to realize it. Otherwise, such a self-destructive attack would become meaningless. It would even be asking for trouble. Now, Shingongqi's heart was filled with despair. He didn't expect this young man to be so crazy. It was as if he had never cared about his own safety. It was the first time he had encountered such a crazy fighting method. Moreover, could he be sure that he wouldn't die with this sword strike? Right now, Shingongqi's heart was also extremely depressed. What was with this kind of fighting style? However, there was one thing that he was very clear about, and that was that his death was imminent. It was unlucky to meet such an opponent. There was another thing that Shingongqi could not understand. Xiao Yang was the master of a world. He had a high position and could enjoy life. However, he was fighting with his life now. Even now, he was trading a life for a life. What was the meaning of his actions? It was the first time Shingongqi had encountered such a shameless and crazy fighting method. He also underestimated Xiao Yang's determination. He did not expect him to really do this. If he had a choice, Xiao Yang would not do this. However, he had no choice. He had to do this. Shingongqi's speed was really too fast. If they continued to fight and looked for an opportunity, they would only end up dead. Therefore, under such circumstances, they could only choose to end the battle as soon as possible. This was the only way to obtain an opportunity to win. Even if they had to pay a huge price, so what? At least with the current price, they still had a chance to win. If he continued to fight, he might not even have the slightest chance. Therefore, the choice was naturally very clear. Xiaoyang took a deep breath. He had already made his preparations. Princess Mingzhu stared at the battle. If she couldn't kill Qi with this strike, she would definitely follow up with another strike. Since Xiaoyang was so determined, she should be even more determined. If he couldn't kill his opponent, then everything would be meaningless. Boom! As the huge golden sword Qi fell, the entire mountain trembled. Blind left and blind right stared at the battle. When they saw the sword fall, the corners of their mouths twitched. This Xiaoyang, those who don't know him would think that he's a fugitive. Who would have thought that the ruler of a world would do something so crazy? Blinds was said with a sigh. Blind right also nodded in agreement. They had always felt that the fighting style of the myriad beast realm was very bloody and cruel. But compared to this battle, it was more or less like a small child in the presence of a great one. No wonder he could kill Bai Xingyun and Bai Cheng. He's really good at fighting with his life, Blind Left said helplessly with a bitter smile. This was because Xiao Yang's actions showed that he did not care about his own life at all. In the face of such a crazy fighting style, if it wasn't for the fact that his cultivation level was so much higher and his strength could crush him, he would probably be afraid. That old thing Bai Cheng has always been afraid of death. It's not surprising that he died. However, Bai Xingyun's death is still a mystery. Blind Right thought for a while and said helplessly. Blind Left also laughed. It could be said that Bai Xingyun's death came from Xiao Yang's mouth. However, no one knew the specific situation. In fact, whether or not Bai Xingyun was still alive was still a mystery. However, Blind Left and Blind Right wouldn't doubt it now. After all, even Qi, a 5th-level martial emperor, was defeated by the two of them. How could Bai Xingyun compete with them? Therefore, the matter became very clear in the eyes of these two people. This is only the first battle, and it's already so difficult. It seems that we can't have too much hope in the future. Blind Right thought for a while and said with a bitter smile. Originally, they thought that Xiaoyang would be able to cause a huge commotion. However, from this battle, they could see many problems. With his current strength, he might be able to turn the 3 tribes upside down. However, if they were to go any further, their strength would not be enough. At this time, Blinds shook his head and said, a 5th-level martial royal realm expert has died in the Wanshou realm. The multicolor tribe, the last of the top 10 tribes, has lost their pillar of support. Is this not enough to cause chaos? Hearing this, Blind Right also smiled bitterly and helplessly. Other things aside, at least 10,000 miles around the multicolor mountain range would probably start fighting because of Qi's death. It was a pity that their Blue Wolf tribe's territory was close to the White Bear tribe. Therefore, it wouldn't be easy to get a share of the loot here. The next one to be attacked is the White Bear tribe. It seems that we have to prepare more. Blind Right laughed. Although they couldn't take over all of the White Bear tribe's territory, they would eat as much as they could. Blind Left shook his head and said, there's no need to rush this matter. After all, serving these two is our top priority. Blind Right nodded with a smile. This was indeed the case. At this time, the formation that was originally built also shattered. Everything seemed to have returned to normal. However, the appearance of the main peak of the multicolor mountain range changed drastically. In this battle, because Xiaoyang paid a huge price, they persevered until the end. Qi fell to the ground and looked like he was on his last breath. He had been cut in half at the waist, and his body was devoured by Xiaohua. Where do you think you're going? Suddenly, Princess Mingzhu slashed with her sword again. In an instant, wherever the sword light passed, it was as if the wind was blowing and the clouds were surging. In the blink of an eye, Qi, whose soul had already left his body, was cut in half again. His last chance of survival was completely cut off. Chapter 24-21. After completely severing Qi's spirit, Princess Mingzhu heaved a sigh of relief. She had finally gotten rid of this troublesome opponent. This was because they had put in too much effort in this battle. If Qi had escaped, the news of this place would have been leaked. By then, some of their plans would have been for naught. Therefore, they had to be careful in every detail. They could leave some traces, but they could not reveal too big of a flaw. Otherwise, many things would have been for naught. It might even become meaningless. Looking at Qi's corpse, the smile on Princess Mingzhu's face deepened. In this first battle, they had killed the strongest expert of the 10 great clans. Although this was only the beginning, it was already a good start. At least in the short term, the multicolored tribe would restrain themselves because of the death of their strongest person. After all, in a large environment like the realm of beasts, once the strongest person was no longer guarding, the other forces that were ready to make a move would most likely take action. The multicolored tribe would also be unable to send troops to deal with the 4-realm alliance due to internal and external troubles. It could be said that the multicolored tribe, as one of the 10 great tribes, had always been supported by Qi alone. Now that he had fallen, some of the problems that they had left behind before would inevitably be exposed. Princess Mingzhu looked up and saw that the young man was half kneeling on the ground. He was relying on the thunder, fire divine, sword to stabilize himself and not fall. In order to restrict Q's speed, Xiaoyang had paid a heavy price. It could even be said that he had used all his skills to forcefully restrict his opponent with his physical body. It was also because of this that Princess Mingzhu was able to slash out a fatal blow. Otherwise, with Q's ability, they would not know how long this battle would take. In fact, it was not impossible for both of them to die in this place. The more Princess Mingzhu thought about it, the more depressed she felt. This was only the beginning, but they were already having such a difficult time. Moreover, the difference between each tribe did not seem big, but it was not the case. "Are you all right?" Princess Mingzhu walked over and asked softly. Xiaoyang shook his head and said, "It's nothing serious. I'll be fine after some rest." After saying that, Xiaoyang immediately took out a few pills and swallowed them. His injuries were very serious, but he knew that he still had things to do. How could he just collapse like this? At the very least, he had to finish everything before he could lie down. Princess Mingzhu looked at the wounds on her companion's body. The wounds were so deep that bones could be seen everywhere. If this was considered fine, then wouldn't he lose his life if something happened to him? Xiaoyang kept taking deep breaths to adjust his aura. Now he also wanted to stand up, but it was very difficult. Just one attempt was enough to make his entire body tremble uncontrollably. Xiaohua, on the other hand, had already begun feasting and devouring Q's body. No matter how weak Qi was, he was still a 5th-level martial emperor. Even though he had lost his life, the spiritual power in his body could not be ignored. Moreover, it was also a delicacy and a great supplement for Xiaohua. This was also why Xiaohua attacked so crazily earlier. If he wanted to become stronger, eating Qi was the only shortcut. Will the other party believe us if we don't leave the corpse behind? Princess Mingzhu frowned and said. Xiaoyang only smiled bitterly and shook his head. He looked at the mess again and shook his head helplessly. He was not sure about this. After all, there were too many flaws in this battle. Whether they could be believed or not was another question. However, if some people only wanted to see what they wanted to see, then this matter would be much simpler. Therefore, Xiaoyang's plan was completely based on people's hearts. If they were willing to use this momentum to do something, then they would naturally be happy to see it. If even that didn't work, then there was nothing else that could be done. Seeing this, Princess Mingzhu smiled bitterly and shook her head. Everything was because their strength was too far apart. Therefore, it was difficult to stir up a storm in the Wanshou realm. In fact, it was almost like an impossible task, which made them feel helpless. Leave this place first. Leave the rest to me. Xiao Yang rested for a while and stood up in one breath. Princess Mingzhu saw that Xiao Yang's body was still trembling and could not help but frown. After hesitating for a moment, Princess Mingzhu immediately turned around and left. Xiao, who also seemed to have received an order. The fire suddenly grew stronger and engulfed Shingongqi's corpse. Then it disappeared on the spot. After seeing that everyone had left, Xiao Yang put on the black robe and soared into the sky. Looking at the huge main peak, a smile appeared on Xiao Yang's face. Although this battle was very difficult, the final result was good. As long as they could do it, it was enough. As for whether their plan would succeed or not, it would depend on the will of the heavens. After standing at the highest point, Xiao Yang roared and clenched his fist. Immediately, bolts of lightning condensed in his hand. Furthermore, as he attacked this time, even the surrounding dark clouds rapidly gathered. Sometimes a martial emperor's every move could affect the power of the heavens and the earth. In particular, some powerful moves required the cooperation of the power of the heavens and the earth to unleash the greatest power. In an instant, a long spear condensed from lightning appeared in Xiao Yang's hand. In an instant, the area within 100 miles was filled with a murderous aura. Even some of the ferocious beasts with lower realms prostrated themselves on the ground in fear, their bodies trembling. Some of the powerhouses in the multicolor tribe also sensed this power and raised their heads to look. They saw a black shadow holding a long spear of lightning in his hand. He stood there like a god and was about to punish their tribe. At this moment, many of the powerhouses were terrified. Who in the multicolor tribe did not know who was living in the main peak. However, their strongest powerhouse did not appear. Xiao Yang looked at the main peak. As more power gathered in his hand, the smile on his face grew wider. Thunder God's Furious Throw. Chapter 24-22. The thunderbolt spear was like the wrath of a god as it poured out. The moment the thunderbolt spear left his hand, some of the ferocious beasts with lower realms were scared out of their wits. Those with weaker minds died on the spot. At that moment, many of the powerhouses in the multicolor tribe felt despair. This was because what they felt was a calamity of destruction. They could not understand why such an unforeseen event would happen in such a short period of time. They could clearly see that the move was the White Bear tribe's trump card. However, such a skill had fallen into the hands of the multicolor tribe. Could it be that the White Bear tribe had taken the initiative to deal with the multicolor tribe because they had suffered serious losses and were afraid that their position would be threatened? Boom! The thunderbolt spear smashed into the main peak of the multicolor mountain range. Immediately, thunder exploded. With endless heavenly might, the main peak was flattened. Smoke and dust swirled around, making it difficult to see what was going on inside. However, everyone still had lingering fears because they could clearly sense that if the spear had landed on them, they would have died without a doubt. How could they be at ease if that was the case? In the next moment, many of the powerhouses wondered if the pillar of their tribe was still there. When the smoke and dust settled, all the powerhouses in the multicolor tribe who were at the martial emperor realm and above rushed toward the main peak at full speed. When they arrived, they only saw a scene of devastation. The towering main peak had become a pile of ruins. As for Shingongqi, everyone tried their best to search for him, but they could not find any signs of life. In the ruins, there were only remnants of the thunderbolt power. From time to time, some of the fragments would explode into powder. After a long time, everyone had almost turned the place upside down, but they could not find any clues. Could it be that the pillar of their tribe had collapsed just like the main peak? For a moment, many people's hearts were covered with a layer of dark clouds. They were filled with despair. As one of the 10 great tribes, their power was needless to say. Even if they had unintentionally offended many tribes, it was a small matter. Previously, because they were afraid of Shingongqi's existence, they could only suppress their anger and did not dare to act out. However, Shingongqi was already gone. Once this news spread out, those tribes that had long been ready to make trouble would not be able to stay still. If I didn't see wrong, that move was the Thunder God's furious throw. A middle-aged man's face suddenly became gloomy as he angrily said. In fact, everyone present was aware of this and had seen it clearly. However, he did not expect the other party to be so deranged. Furthermore, it was done with great fanfare. What a white bear tribe! How dare they do this? A skinny man walked out and said in a deep voice, "The lightning god's furious throw could be said to be synonymous with the white bear tribe. Moreover, the number of people in the white bear tribe who could use this move could be counted with one's fingers. Now that Bai Cheng and Bai Xingyun had successively lost their lives in the flowing cloud world, there was only one possibility left." Thinking of this, almost everyone gnashed their teeth in hatred. Although some of the Almighties were grieving, they had no choice but to face reality. After all, they had to worry about how to protect their own territory or fight against other tribes. Shingongqi was like a ferocious tiger. Without him in the multicolor tribe, it was inevitable that there would be a situation where there was no tiger in the mountain and the monkey would become the overlord. Haha, even if our tribe is destroyed because of this, we can't let the main culprit go. Someone stood out and said with gritted teeth. In an instant, everyone present was furious. They did not expect such a huge change to occur so suddenly and caught them off guard. In this ruin, everyone was furious. They also wanted to directly kill the white bear tribe and make them pay with their blood. However, they also understood another thing. In their current state, without a fifth-level martial emperor overseeing them, even if they went, they would only be courting death. Therefore, they were still very clear about which was more important. Xiaoyang had learned the furious thunder god throw from Bai Cheng and Bai Xingyun's souls. It could be said that this plan had already been brewing when he took the first step. On the way here, he had even cultivated the white bear tribe's ultimate skill to the point of perfection. It could be said that this plan had only officially begun at that time. However, if they wanted to use this move to kill Shingongqi, it would be too difficult. Therefore, they could only settle for the second best. As long as they let the multicolor tribe know that their main peak was destroyed by the furious thunder god throw and pointed all the blame at the white bear tribe, it would be enough. Previously, they had also let Left Blind and Right Blind spread the news that the white bear tribe would make a move on the multicolor tribe. The previous rumor was probably just a rumor. However, after such a commotion, the rumor would probably become reality. In this way, there would naturally be more variables. In the following time, they would only need to add fuel to the fire. On a winding path in the multicolor mountain range, a woman dressed in white carried a black-robed man on her back. There were 2 guards in front and behind her, and they were very careful. After Xiaoyang threw the thunder spear, he had almost used up the last bit of strength in his body. As a result, he could no longer suppress the injuries in his body and fell directly. Fortunately, Princess Mingzhu was quick to catch him. Otherwise, if Xiaoyang was lying there, who knew what kind of terrifying thing would happen? Left Blind and Right Blind were also amazed. They found it difficult to understand what kind of monster Xiaoyang was. The furious thunder god throw was the white bear tribe's ultimate skill. Even the top almighties needed to spend decades to comprehend the profound meaning behind it. However, Xiaoyang had only used a short period of time, and he was already proficient in using it. Thinking of this, Blind's heart was filled with fear. There were too many problems that they could not understand and see through. At the same time, they began to feel fearful. Xiaoyang was indeed a monstrous genius. It was indeed a terrifying thing to become enemies with such a character. Fortunately, they were considered to be on the same side for the time being, so there was no need to worry too much. However, this also strengthened Left Blind's determination. If he continued to follow Xiaoyang, he might really have a future. Chapter 24-23. In a quiet cave, a man in a black robe was lying on a cold stone bed. A lady in white was sitting cross-legged on the other side, cultivating. Dripping sounds could be heard from the cave. There was water seeping somewhere in the cave, and water droplets kept rolling down. The cave was very old, and it had existed for a long time. However, there was a 3-foot deep depression where the water droplets were. It was true that dripping water could penetrate a stone. As long as enough time passed, everything was possible. 10 days had passed since the battle in the multicolor mountain range. Xiaoyang had also been lying on the stone bed for a long time. Fortunately, their cultivation was profound, and they knew how to conceal themselves. Therefore, when the multicolor mountain range was in chaos, they could walk out without their opponents noticing. Now, under the lead of Blind Left and Blind Right, they had arrived at the Grey Wolf tribe's residence. In the vast myriad beasts realm, if one needed a safe place, only the Ash Wolf clan's territory would be suitable. After all, what Blind Left and Blind Right had done was not tolerated in the beast realm. In order to not let the matter leak out, in addition to their wild ambitions, they naturally had to protect Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu with all their might. Even if the matter was exposed, they could still find an excuse to avoid the disaster. However, with Shingongqi's death in the battle, they were tempted. They were now one of the top 100 tribes. If they could become one of the top 10 tribes, why not? However, they needed an opportunity to completely disrupt the situation in the beast realm. Such an opportunity could be given to them by Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu. Therefore, in this way, they could rely on this point to take advantage of the chaos and profit. It was a pity that the multicolor tribe was too far away from the Grey Wolf tribe's territory, so they could not get a share. However, they were not anxious or worried. They suggested Princess Mingzhu to come here to subtly hint to them that it was time to make a move on the White Bear tribe, which was ranked 9th. The Grey Wolf tribe and the White Bear tribe were neighbors. Because of this, they had no choice but to submit to them to ensure that they would not be annexed by them. Every year, the Grey Wolf tribe would pay tribute to the White Bear tribe, and they would give out many things. Left Blind and Right Blind had had enough of such days. Therefore, now that there was a chance to change the situation, how could they not cherish it? Opportunities did not wait for people. In this kind of opportunity where one could completely cut off all ties, one only needed to do some things carefully. Therefore, under such circumstances, they naturally had a lot of things to do. As for Xiaoyang's injuries, there was naturally no problem with Princess Mingzhu looking after him. Another few days passed before Xiaoyang woke up. When he saw the woman sitting by the side and waiting for him, a smile appeared on his face. Fortunately, he had Princess Mingzhu to accompany him on this invasion of the Wanshou realm. Otherwise, it would be quite difficult for him to cause trouble on his own. At the very least, if he wanted to kill Shingongqi, it would be extremely difficult for him to do so by himself. In fact, he even had to take out many of his trump cards. Even if he had to use his final trump card, it was still possible. By then, it would be an extremely difficult problem whether their plan could be carried out smoothly. Princess Mingzhu seemed to have noticed that Xiaoyang had woken up. She smiled and nodded. They did not need to say many words to understand each other. In this cooperation, they could be said to be perfect. No matter what kind of risky move they made, both sides could cooperate with each other and would not miss the opportunity because of a moment of hesitation. You can't do this again in the future. If there was a slight accident with that sword, I'm afraid you would be accidentally injured. Princess Mingzhu sighed sadly. Although the situation was like an arrow on a bow and had to be shot, such a risk should be avoided as much as possible. Otherwise, if they tried such a risky method too many times, there might be a problem. It would not be a cooperation, but self-harm. Xiaoyang smiled faintly and said, I had no choice. Shingongqi's speed was truly too fast. Other than using this method to restrict him, Xiaoyang really couldn't think of any other method. Therefore, There was nothing he could do at the moment. If he wanted to defeat his opponent, even if he had to pay a price, Xiaoyang would stand up without hesitation. As long as the price was within his acceptable range, it was feasible. Sometimes, being overly cautious and needing to think through everything clearly would only slow down one's actions. It was even possible that he would miss the last chance because of this. Since he had identified it, he definitely had to make a move. Hesitation had never been Xiaoyang's style. Looking at Xiaoyang's serious manner, Princess Mingzhu felt a little uncomfortable in her heart. How could she not understand many of the principles behind it? However, understanding and having to do it were two completely different things. Moreover, there could not be any mistakes. Once there was a mistake in the cooperation, the consequences would be incalculable. Oh, you! Princess Mingzhu did not know what to say. The situation at the time was just like that. It seemed that apart from this, there was no better way to kill Shingongqi. Moreover, their goal was not as simple as killing Shingongqi. They had to make more arrangements to obtain the greatest benefits from this battle. Fortunately, all of this was done, and Xiaoyang did not lose his life because of this, nor did he hurt his foundation. Perhaps this was the best outcome. Xiaoyang still had a faint smile on his face. He said, "Don't worry too much. I think this is the first time, and it will also be the last time." Moreover, the main reason was that the opponent was too fast and difficult to deal with. As such, Xiaoyang had to think more and collect the battle information of the others. They had planned so carefully this time, but they still suffered in the end. The main reason was that they knew too little about the enemy. If they could understand a little more and then formulate a targeted combat strategy, perhaps they wouldn't be in such a predicament. Once bitten, twice shy. After such a battle, Xiaoyang had become much more clear-headed. Chapter 24:24. The 10 great tribes of the Myriad Beast Realm and a few of the top 100 tribes were actively preparing for the invasion of the Four Realms Alliance. They wanted to take it down in one battle to prevent future troubles. It was also a good way to enrich their strength and prepare to take down the Inflame Realm and dominate this region. However, during this period, many things happened, causing the deployment of the Myriad Beast Realm to fall into chaos again. In the beginning, everyone saw the huge benefits after swallowing the Four Realms Alliance, so they were very excited and cooperated well. Everything could be said to be caused by benefits, so they didn't feel awkward. In the face of benefits, it was common for everyone to call each other brothers. However, a rumor suddenly spread in the Inflame Realm, causing the Myriad Beast Realm to have no choice but to stop immediately. Even in the Inflame Realm, one of their positions was directly captured by the Inflame Realm because too many of their almighties had withdrawn. The army in the battle could be said to be almost completely wiped out. After such a thing happened, the momentum of the Inflame Realm's attack became fiercer. As a result, some of the almighties from the Myriad Beast Realm who wanted to withdraw had to stop immediately. Otherwise, the territories they conquered in the Inflame Realm would be taken away by the Inflame Realm. The two realms were originally in a tug-of-war, nibbling away at each other bit by bit. If the losses were too severe, it would not be so easy for the Myriad Beast Realm's army to push back. They were very clear about which was more important and which was more important. Therefore, they were unwilling to give up on the competition with the Inflame Realm. As a result, most of the almighties were pinned down in the Inflame Realm and couldn't return at all. As a result, almost all of the almighties who stayed in the Myriad Beast Realm were existences guarding a region. They would almost never be mobilized. Now, many tribes in the Myriad Beast Realm had a headache because the White Bear tribe had done their best, but ended up with a complete wipeout. They had to be cautious when making decisions. As a result, how to solve this problem became a problem in everyone's heart. Moreover, many of these matters could not be completely settled with just a few words. The scruples in their hearts were very uncomfortable, and they couldn't think of a good way to solve it. While he was in a state of confusion, another incident occurred. The most powerful warrior of the multicolored tribe, Shingongqi, had been killed. The fatal blow was the Thunder God's furious throw. Everyone knew that the multicolor tribe and the white bear tribe had long been enemies. Back then, the white bloodline of the white bear tribe had been stationed next to the multicolor tribe. There had been constant conflicts between the two tribes. In the end, it was only when the By branch went to the Bailey branch's territory that the grudge gradually subsided. Of course, because of this, the white bear tribe surpassed the multicolor tribe and became the 9th tribe. Although they seemed to be minding their own business because they were far apart and their territories were not connected, the knot in their hearts had always been there. However, within the white bear tribe, there was only one person who could use the furious lightning god throw. Moreover, there was only one person who could beat Shingongqi to the point where his soul was scattered and turned into ashes. However, the Bailey branch and the By branch had never been on good terms. Under such circumstances, the old man from the Bailey family launched a surprise attack on the multicolor tribe. This was somewhat unreasonable. Moreover, he had done it in secret. There were many reasons for this, which were even more thought-provoking and unfathomable. Soon there was a new theory. It was said that the white bear tribe had suffered heavy losses and was afraid that they would be attacked by a group and lose their position as one of the top 10 tribes. That was why they had attacked the weakest tribe, the multicolor tribe. The multicolor tribe's position was already on the verge of collapse. It was carried by Shingongqi alone. If he was gone, the multicolor tribe would no longer have the ability to occupy the 10th place. At that time, everyone would turn their attention to the multicolor tribe. The white bear tribe could also take advantage of this opportunity to recuperate. In this way, there were some conspiracy theories that were trying to divert the disaster. The multicolor tribe was in a dilemma because of this. If they continued to call themselves one of the 10 great tribes, a bloody battle would be unavoidable. Under the circumstances where everything was made clear, many forces who were ready to make a move gradually began to surface. Even some of the tribes around the multicolor tribe were in close contact with each other. They seemed to have begun to discuss how to divide the territory. There were so many things happening here that one couldn't help but be shaken. Moreover, the benefits involved in this matter were also extremely high. Sometimes, when you could not protect something, it was a crime to possess a jade ring. The multicolor mountain range was a paradise. Who would not be moved by it? Which tribe wouldn't want to have a good place and environment for themselves to enjoy? It was another major event that was about to cause internal strife. Therefore, the invasion of the World Alliance was postponed again. However, some of the forces that were at the front of the 10 great tribes felt that these things would not affect them much. Therefore, they were still actively preparing for war. In their opinion, their strength was already tyrannical enough. If they could have 1 or 2 allies to help them, it would be enough to take down the weak 4-realm alliance. However, there were no movements between the tribes. They were all waiting for a suitable time to develop a tacit understanding before they made a move. Some of the smaller tribes also wanted a piece of the pie. They all began to throw in iron, wanting to join the war. Therefore, after Shingongqi died, only the southeastern part of the realm of beasts began to stir. The other places were either too far away or too weak. Therefore, they did not join the action. In the depths of a mountain, 2 thin men were walking side by side. They were talking and laughing. They seemed to be very happy. It looked as if they had obtained some great opportunity. That was why they were so happy. Now, our chance has arrived. I wonder how much land we can swallow this time, Xia said excitedly. Although their realm of beasts did not have much turmoil because of this, the southeastern part was in chaos because of this. If something happened to the white bear tribe, then they could start to nibble away. It was even possible for them to take the entire southeastern part into their own pocket if they had a long-term vision. However, it would take a long time. Chapter 24-25. At this moment, Blind You was also grinning from ear to ear. From the information obtained these days, it could be said that there was good news coming from time to time. If they could control it well, there might be some other unexpected gains. Previously, they did not have much hope, but with the success of the plan, they felt that they could look forward to more. After all, the opportunity had appeared. However, it was not easy to grasp it. Even if everything goes smoothly, we should not rush to take action. Wait for the surrounding tribes to fight. After both sides are injured, it will not be too late to clean up the mess. Blind Left sneered and said, Blind You also nodded in agreement, because this way they could take down more places with the least cost. The other tribes would also suffer great losses because of fighting with each other. At that time, they only needed to put on a show, and it would be enough to scare away those rascals. Therefore, the two of them were well aware of what they should do next. Even though there were still many uncertainties, they could still fight for these things. Although it was inevitable that it would be a bit ridiculous to put all their hopes on outsiders. But how could it not be ridiculous for a tribe to become a tribe? Moreover, there was no one in their Blue Wolf clan who could amaze the whole world, so it was difficult to rely on strength. They could only rely on tactics and wait for the right time to take action to get more benefits. As long as they could lay the foundation, then over time, there would naturally be some indomitable figures. At that time, it would be the time for them to rise. Therefore, they knew these things and were excited, but they still needed to pretend to be very calm. After all, sometimes once they saw a little bit of benefit, they would pounce on it without caring about their own safety. In the end, they would only suffer a double loss. In the Battle of the Western Plains in the Sword Heart Realm, Blind Left and Blind You had also thoroughly experienced such changes, so sometimes they still couldn't ask for too much. Otherwise, once an accident happened, it would be difficult for anyone to control it. It was even possible that the situation would become worse. As long as they were careful and controlled all the situations well, they could take down more things with the least cost. This approach was always the safest. They could even get more things because of this. Should we give the order for all the disciples of our tribe not to go out? Yufei thought for a while and asked. Blinds shook his head and said, Just act as you normally do. If you act too deliberately, it will be disadvantageous to us. Blind You nodded, as if he understood. He also could not understand the logic behind this. However, he knew very well that Blind's decisions were always right. All he needed to do was to follow Blind's instructions. After the Battle of the West Plains in the Sword Heart Realm, the Blue Wolf clan's vitality had been greatly damaged, and self-preservation had become a problem. But now, not only had they stabilized the situation, they even had the opportunity to go against the current. With such a great opportunity, how could they ask for more? When you go in later, don't speak if you can. Although Xiaoyang is kind and honest, this is not a reason for us to take a mile after taking an inch. Xia exhorted. Blind You hurriedly nodded. Previously, he was indeed unconvinced. But now he was completely convinced, especially when he sensed that Xiaoyang's realm was only at the 3rd level martial emperor realm, but he was able to entangle Shingongqi. This showed how abnormal his strength was. Once such a person grew up, he would be an immeasurable existence. Now was the best time for them to surrender. If their performance satisfied the other party, they might be able to get his protection, as long as they did not die prematurely. With Xiaoyang's power, they might be able to unify the myriad beast realm in the future. Of course, they were also very rational. They set a small goal for themselves, which was to swallow half of the territory of the White Bear tribe first, and then find an opportunity to take the whole southeast into their own pocket. At that time, with confidence, they might be able to achieve great things. Although such a chance was very slim, they still had to try. Who knew they might succeed? After a short while, they arrived in front of a cave. Princess Mingzhu, Blind Left and Blind You request to see you. The two respectfully bowed with the etiquette of human cultivators. After seeing the two strength and methods, Blind Left and Blind You were truly impressed. Therefore, all of this was because of their feelings. Of course, their nature could not be changed. What they were after was still benefits. If Xiaoyang could no longer give them benefits in the future, if he still had the strength, it would not be strange if they turned hostile on the spot. Wolves had always been like this. Come in. A clear female voice sounded. "Blind left and blind," you both responded, and quickly walked in. After entering, the two saw Xiaoyang sitting there. His gaze was mystical. It seemed that his previous injuries had completely recovered and he had reached his peak. Of course. What shocked them even more was that Xiaoyang's aura had become stronger again. It was obvious that his realm had improved again. Such a method of using battle to nurture battle could indeed allow one's strength to increase quickly. However, there was a great risk in doing so. Congratulations to Master Xiao for improving your strength again. It's hard for us to catch up with such speed. Blind Yu immediately started to flatter. Xiaoyang did not care about this. He waved his hand and motioned for Blind Yu to stop talking. When Blind Right saw this, he laughed awkwardly. It was indeed hard to see that he had been able to maintain a humble attitude towards such a person with heaven-defying strength and talent. In the myriad beast realm, which prodigy was not arrogant. For example, Baiwuxi was not willing to look them in the eye. However, Baiwuxi died in the hands of Xiaoyang. Don't talk nonsense. It's meaningless. What's the situation now? Tell me about it, Xiaoyang said in a deep voice. The framing this time was originally linked to cause the entire southeast to fall into chaos. He also knew how long he had been unconscious this time. Therefore, he had to ensure the direction of the situation. It was only after understanding all of this that they could formulate the next step. Otherwise, it would not be good to keep waiting like this. It would not do if he missed such a good opportunity. Chapter 24-26. When Blind Zhuo heard this, he chuckled helplessly. Xiaoyang had always been a steady person. However, every time he asked a question, he went straight to the point and did not say too much. At this moment, Blind Left started to ponder again. These days he had received a lot of information, but most of it was disorderly, although he had already sorted it out in his mind once before. Now that he was facing Xiaoyang, he had to do it again. He didn't want to make any mistakes in the report. Otherwise, if Xiaoyang was unhappy and gave them a slap or two, all their previous efforts would be wasted. As such, they knew very well what they should do. Blind Left Yu stood aside obediently. Since Blind Left asked him to speak less, he would not speak if he did not know how to. If he became brainless and said the wrong thing, it would be disadvantageous to them if he caused more trouble. How could they not know what choice to make? Princess Mingzhu sat aside and did not seem to care about these things, because she felt that Xiaoyang would plan everything, so she did not have to worry about it. Moreover, the only thing she needed to worry about was how to defeat her opponent. The two of them were very clear about the division of labor and had a tacit understanding with each other. After a long while, Blind Left explained the current situation one by one. When Xiaoyang heard the situation, he smiled knowingly, because this battle was enough to delay the departure of the Wanshou realm army for several months. In this way, they could buy more time. Therefore, when the matter became bigger and bigger, the departure of the Wanshou realm army would be delayed indefinitely. This was his goal. Wasn't the purpose of causing chaos in the Wanshou realm so that they could not send out their troops? However, Xiaoyang was quite satisfied with what happened in the Inflame realm. He did not expect King Zhao to be so adaptable. If this matter was handled by someone else, the Inflame realm might pay attention to the Four-Realm Alliance. In this way, it could barely be considered a fortunate thing, allowing them to continue holding on. This time, the White Bear tribe's yellow mud has fallen into their pants. If it's not sh*t, it's sh*t. Blinds will laughed happily as he spoke. The steward of the White Bear tribe stood up and said that their patriarch was still in seclusion. How could he have gone to the multicolored mountain range? He even listed all kinds of deeds, but now who was willing to listen? The best proof was the furious throw of the Thunder God. Thus, the White Bear tribe had no choice but to shoulder the blame and bear the consequences. The best part of this move is that it can capture the hearts of the people and give them an excuse to start a war against the White Bear tribe. Blinds were praised again. Xiaoyang raised his eyebrows. From his tone, He could guess that his plan had caused a chain reaction. "What do you mean?" Xiaoyang asked with a smile. Blind Zhuo looked around and found that there was indeed a barrier set up in the cave. He then continued, "The people of the multicolored tribe went to the Black Tiger tribe." When he said this, Xiaoyang raised his eyebrows. As for what exactly was going on, he could already guess it in his heart. Back then, the multicolored tribe had a grudge with the by bloodline, but because they escaped, it was beyond their reach, so they did not continue to fight. However, from then on, the multicolored tribe started to be on good terms with the Black Tiger tribe so that they could restrain the White Bear tribe. "The relationship between both sides is very good," Blinds was said. Back then, the chief of the multicolored tribe had foreseen many possibilities, so he befriended the Black Tiger tribe in advance. If the White Bear tribe started a war against them, they could ask the Black Tiger tribe to attack them from behind, making it difficult for them to defend themselves. It was also because of this that after the By bloodline and the Bailey bloodline merged, even though they were stronger than the multicolored tribe, they did not dare to start a war easily. All of them were shrewd and had analyzed the situation clearly. If they did not have full confidence, no one would act recklessly. With such tacit understanding, the stalemate continued. However, with this shift in blame, the situation changed. "I heard that the multicolored tribe has made up their mind to become a subordinate of the Black Tiger tribe. Their only request is for the White Bear tribe to pay with their blood. Once the White Bear tribe is destroyed, the multicolored tribe will immediately bow down to them," Blinds was said. Xiaoyang nodded with a smile. Everything was similar to what he had expected. As long as the Black Tiger tribe joined this war, then their scheme could continue. When the time came, they would reap the rewards that they should. Moreover, everything at the moment was very beneficial to the Black Tiger tribe. Most of the elites of the White Bear tribe had died in the Flowing Cloud realm. It could be said that their vitality was greatly damaged. As for the multicolored tribe, due to the loss of Shengong Qi, it would be difficult for them to continue holding on. Therefore, based on this calculation, the Black Tiger tribe's strength was the most complete. As long as they joined forces with the multicolored tribe to destroy the White Bear tribe first, and then make them bow down to them, the southeast that was occupied by the three tribes could be unified by the Black Tiger tribe. Under such a premise, the Black Tiger tribe was also very tempted. This was also a matter of scheming. It was no longer important who killed Shengong Qi and how he died. What was important was that the Black Tiger tribe could quickly unify the southeast. When the time came, with the southeast being the dominant tribe, their strength might also advance by leaps and bounds. At that time, it would not be a problem for their ranking to rise. It could even be said that the Black Tiger tribe was secretly pushing for this matter. In the 10,000 Beasts realm, as long as one was in power, one would have great ambitions. Once a great opportunity appeared, one would have to firmly control it in one's hands. Only in this way could one obtain greater benefits. If he had to figure out everything, how would he be able to fish in troubled waters when the truth came to light? Sometimes it was not easy for an opportunity to appear. Moreover, the Black Tiger tribe's ambition had been exposed long ago. It was just that they had not made a move all this time because they did not have a suitable opportunity. With the White Bear tribe's previous strength, once the Black Tiger tribe made a move, the final result would only be a lose-lose situation. At that time, the multicolored tribe would be able to benefit from it. Chapter 24-27. The southeast region of the Beast Realm was also in a tripartite state. They had always been wary of each other, and no one dared to break the stalemate. After all, if you made a move against someone, the other party would preserve their full strength and slowly plan their next move. However, as the White Bear tribe's vitality was greatly damaged and the only pillar of the multicolor tribe had collapsed, the balance in the southeast was completely broken. It could be said that the Black Tiger tribe was now the dominant force. If they were willing, they would have the opportunity to unify the southeast together. In the beginning, the Black Tiger tribe was still wary. After all, if the two tribes were forced into a corner, they would definitely join forces. Even if they managed to unify the southeast, their vitality would be greatly damaged. When that time came, it was inevitable that other people would want a share of the loot. Therefore, the Black Tiger tribe had been biding their time and temporarily focused on the Four-Realm Alliance. However, the Multicolor tribe had taken the initiative to ask for it. Naturally, the Black Tiger tribe knew what to do. If they missed the opportunity to unify the southeast, it would be difficult for them to get such an opportunity in the future. Therefore, the Black Tiger tribe had given sufficient hints, and the Multicolor tribe understood. Therefore, they hit it off and knew what to do next to be the most effective. In the face of huge benefits, no one could remain calm. The Black Tiger tribe did not even wait for the Almighty to return from the in-flame world battlefield. They had already started plotting this matter. They had even taken some action, but it was not obvious. However, everyone knew that the chaos in the southeast was inevitable. From the beginning to the end of this war, it was inevitable. No one could avoid it. After knowing the situation, Xiaoyang felt much more at ease. However, when would this war start? This was somewhat thought-provoking. However, after thinking about it, it did not matter when it started. This was because all they could do now was wait for the right time. After all, they had taken the initiative to do what they could. However, there was nothing they could do now. They could only continue to wait. Moreover, all the discussions about the White Bear tribe were arranged by Xiaoyang to spread by Left Blind and Right Blind. Adding fuel to the fire was something that needed to be done. However, now that the time was ripe, they only needed to let it change freely. There was no need to do anything else. Sometimes, the more you do, the more mistakes you make. Therefore, it was clear which was more important. I have to say this move is really good. They've been fooled by him. Blindswood chuckled. Xiaoyang only smiled and nodded. That was all he could do. As for how they should react next, they could only proceed from the current situation and not think too much about it. When will the Black Tiger tribe make their move? Is there any news? Xiaoyang asked in a deep voice. Blindswood smiled and nodded, saying, I heard that the Black Tiger tribe has already begun to gather their men. I believe that the attack on the White Bear tribe is also a recent matter. After saying that, Blindswood frowned again, because he thought of another possibility, and that was that it would not be easy for them to be the fishermen this time. After all, the last time the two of them worked together to kill Shingongqi, they had already paid a huge price before they barely managed to kill him. The battle this time would most likely be in the White Bear tribe's old nest. By then, not only would they have to face the White Bear tribe, but they would also have to face the elites of the Black Tiger tribe. Under such circumstances, it would not be easy to win. Blindswood could not help but feel a headache at the thought of that. Although the idea was good, it was still difficult to put it into practice. It could even be said that it was almost impossible. The more Blindswood thought about it, the more upset he felt. However, he would not say it out loud. After all, it was a matter of luck. If they were lucky, they might be able to soar into the sky. If they failed, there was nothing they could do. As long as the Grey Wolf tribe was not affected, it would be enough. Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu entered the Grey Wolf tribe in secret. In fact, other than the two of them, no one in the entire beast realm knew about their existence. It was also because they were waiting in the dark that it was easy for them to do things. If they became transparent right away, their every word and action would be restricted. No matter how good one's calculation skills were, it would be difficult to perform because of other people's precautions. Xiaoyang naturally saw through Blindswood's thoughts, but he did not mind. After all, there were many things that could not be said clearly. He looked at Princess Mingzhu again and saw that she was still very calm. It was as if what was going to happen next was nothing more than a normal thing to her, just like eating and drinking. It was not that Princess Mingzhu was careless and did not consider the dangers. It was just that she felt that the man beside her was trustworthy. As long as he was around, all problems would be solved. If the situation exceeded their expectations, he would naturally come up with countermeasures. After all, they came to the beast realm, this time to disturb and not to die. As for the worst-case scenario where they would lose their lives, that was only something that could happen under the circumstances. They had to be mentally prepared. Then Xiaoyang took a deep breath and said, "When the time comes, find out more about it. It's best if you know the enemy's route of attack clearly." Hearing that, Blinds was smiled and nodded. He understood the principle behind it. Only by knowing oneself and the enemy could one win 100 battles. Moreover, after knowing the exact route, it would be easier to play some tricks on the details. The difference in strength between them was already very big. If they wanted to win, there was only one way, which was to play some tricks on the details. That was the only way to increase their chances of winning bit by bit. That's not a problem, but we can't pry too deeply in case the enemy becomes suspicious, Blinds was said in a deep voice. Xiaoyang nodded in affirmation. Of course, that was needless to say. Sometimes, if they did too much, they would reveal more flaws. If that was the case, the situation would become very bad. Even the Tsonglang tribe might be implicated. By then, without a spy, Xiaoyang and the others would have a lot of trouble. It could be said that without Blindswa and Blindswa, everything would not have progressed so smoothly. Leader Xiao, I heard that there are changes in the central region. I'm afraid an opportunity has appeared, Blindswa said. Chapter 24-28. Hearing this, Xiaoyang couldn't help but be slightly stunned. He did not expect a new opportunity to appear in the Wanshou realm. It was a rare thing. He had not found an opportunity for a long time. He did not expect to encounter one here. However, Xiaoyang was also worried because it was not the right time. Their main goal this time was to create chaos in the Wanshou realm. However, whether or not they still had the opportunity and possibility to search for this opportunity naturally became another question. It was possible that they would just pass by. How much do you know about this? Xiaoyang asked with a smile. If time allowed, they could give it a try. If the timing was not right, there was nothing they could do. Blindswa thought for a while and said, According to an Almighty, I'm afraid that the opportunity will appear at least a month later. When Xiaoyang heard this, he smiled and nodded. If there was enough time, he could also join in the fun. As for now, it was more important to settle the matter in front of them. They did not know that the Black Tiger tribe was in such a hurry to take over the southeast region because they wanted to catch up with the opportunity and get a share of the pie. After all, there was such chaos in the southeast region. The forces in other regions did not have any scruples because of the opportunity in the central region. Otherwise, how could some of the ambitious clans just stand by and watch? Moreover, the appearance of the opportunity this time had caused a change in heaven and earth. It could be seen how important it was. If they could hold it in their hands, how much improvement would it bring? Therefore, with all these prerequisites, everything was clear. Are you guys going to take a look too? Xiaoyang asked with a smile. Blindswa was very tempted. He naturally wanted to try his luck in the central region. However, the changes in the southeast region made him very tempted. Therefore, he was currently in a dilemma. What to do next was very difficult for them. One could not have the best of both worlds. If they wanted to improve themselves, they had to try the central region. But at the same time, they also wanted to expand their territory. But without their protection, the Tsonglang tribe would not have it easy either. At the same time, Blind Left and Blind Right had to bear another risk, and that was the White Bear tribe's defeat. If Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu failed in this scheme, then their Tsonglang tribe, as a subordinate of the White Bear tribe, would inevitably be threatened by the Black Tiger tribe. If you want to go, then go. It doesn't matter if the time allows it. Xiaoyang smiled again and said, Blind Left and Blind Right looked at each other. They could not understand Xiaoyang's words. However, they were indeed very tempted and wanted to give it a try. However, it would not be an easy task to try it now. All of these arrangements were built on the premise that everything would go smoothly. If something went wrong, then their plans would be completely disrupted. When the time came, it would not be easy to fix it. In this way, they had more things to worry about. We will listen to leader Zhao's arrangements." Blind Left smiled and said. Blind Right hurriedly nodded as well. Since they had already done so much, it wouldn't matter much even if they followed Xiaoyang. After all, this was just an attempt to hide in the dark. It was fine if they did not succeed as long as they could protect themselves. However, if the opportunity came, then they would soar to the sky. Blind Left and Blind Right might have never thought that they would lose a lot of vitality in the war between human cultivators. But now, they had to rely on them to rise up. Many years later, when they recalled these past events, they might think that they were ridiculous. Moreover, these things were not so simple to explain clearly. "Don't worry, even if we fail, we will not say anything about you. I'm a kind and honest person. So, I hope that you will be more kind in the future. Otherwise, if I attack you, on account of our current cooperation, I am afraid that I will make things difficult for you." Xiaoyang smiled and said softly. Now, Xiaoyang's smile looked very strange, as if it meant something else. Blind Right was also confused when he heard this. He was even more confused about the reason behind this sudden lament. Blind Left smiled and nodded. He naturally understood Xiaoyang's intention. However, he was not in a hurry to express his opinion. After all, if he expressed his opinion, he would have to bear the consequences. If you think too much and make too many promises, I'm afraid the consequences will be even more serious. At least, in Blind Left's opinion, their current situation was very good. It would be fine to continue like this. When the situation was completely stabilized, it would not be too late to surrender. The two of us have received your kindness, so we naturally won't stab you in the back. Blind Left also smiled and said. Hearing this, Xiaoyang frowned slightly. Immediately he felt much better. Wolves were like that. Sometimes if one had too much hope, it would be cruel to oneself. After all, you would never know what kind of thoughts these beasts had in their hearts. If one treated it as a friend, it would be the beginning of one's own destruction. Wolves were very difficult to raise. Moreover, in the current state of the myriad beast realm, their eyes were more focused on the existence of benefits. Everything else was just a matter of the current situation. Everything could change because of the change of interests. The battle situation of the In-Flame world also underwent a huge change because of some changes. The intensity of the battle between the two sides could be said to be the strongest in the past 10 years. Especially that incomparably crazy counterattack. It gave the powerhouses of the myriad beast realm a headache. They didn't know what was going on either. Similarly, the powerhouses of the myriad beast realm also began to frantically investigate, wanting to know who leaked the news. On the contrary, the army of the In-Flame world became more and more courageous as they fought, and the number of troops they invested also increased. This tug-of-war that had lasted for thousands of years also underwent a huge change because of these small changes. Some long-awaited victories also greatly boosted the morale of the In-Flame world. Many forces even declared that this time they would drive out the entire myriad beast realm and let them know the power of the In-Flame world. At this time, many powerhouses also showed absolute, tacit understanding and attacked one after another, not giving the myriad beast realm a chance to breathe. Chapter 24-29. The In-Flame world's battle strategy had suddenly undergone a huge change, which caught the Wansho realm off guard. They never thought that everything would happen so quickly. In the end, the Wansho realm could only helplessly ask for reinforcements, but they did not receive any response. However, since the Wansho realm could take root in the In-Flame world for so long, they naturally had some ability. Moreover, they were quite capable. The fierce battle between the two sides became more and more intense, which caused the situation to become more and more serious. With the deaths of some almighties, the anger of both sides became heavier, and there were more and more revenge battles. For a time, almost the entire battlefront had been ignited with the flames of war, and there were constant battles every day. The instigator of all this, King Zhao, was leisurely sitting in a tea house, drinking tea. Occasionally he would hear the news from the locals, and he would be secretly delighted. It could be said that he did not expect that, by fanning the flames with his mouth, he could push the war to such an extent. This was indeed a little unexpected. However, it was naturally a good thing to be able to reach this point. The fiercer the battle between the two worlds, the safer the four-realm alliance would be. Although they could not become fishermen and reap the final rewards, they could at least have a long time to breathe. Were the people of the Four Realms Alliance really inferior to those two worlds? King Zhao did not think so. He only thought that they were at a disadvantage because they did not have enough time. In the future, when all the geniuses grew up, the situation would be completely stabilized. At that time, no matter which world it was, they could even compete. But to achieve this goal, who knows how long it will take? King Zhao said as he shook his head helplessly and sighed. He had done all he could, but as for how far he could go, he could only leave it to fate. After drinking a pot of tea, King Zhao slowly got up, left a spiritual stone, and quickly left. Since he had done all he could, and the situation he wanted to see had already appeared, there was no point in continuing to stay in the Yin Flame world. Therefore, it was better to go back as soon as possible. The upheaval in the southeast of the realm of beasts was a foregone conclusion. After the Black Tiger tribe and the Multicolor tribe discussed, they reached an agreement. In addition, most of the tribe's attention was on the opportunity that was about to appear in the central region, so no one cared about this place. Perhaps in their eyes, the southeast was just a barren land. Even if they managed to take him down, it wouldn't make much sense. If they wanted to fight, then let them fight. If they didn't go to the central region, it would reduce their chances of success. At that time, the opportunities that they could obtain would also be greater. Even if the southeast was penetrated, some mighty figures wouldn't care. From their point of view, the current Multicolor tribe was not qualified. Even if it was gone, so be it. It did not matter. Moreover, there were actually 3 big tribes in the barren southeast region. That was a bit too much. Even if the 10 great tribes became the 8 great tribes, they wouldn't care. In fact, they might even feel that this was a good thing, because they represented the strongest battle power in the realm of beasts. It would be unreasonable to let those who were not strong enough sneak in. Of course, some tribes had already thought about it and were prepared to do something in this area. The 10 great tribes would still be the 10 great tribes, but there would be 2 more subordinate tribes among them. It could be said that the 10 great tribes had the right to speak in the realm of beasts. When the time came, the more power they had, the more weight they would have. As for the southeast region, they could fight however they wanted. It didn't matter. As a result, the Black Tiger tribe was more confident. Since no one would interfere, it was possible for them to unify the southeast region. As for how far they could go, that was another matter. It wasn't something that they could estimate. As long as they could achieve their goal, it would be fine. Therefore, after the mighty figures of the Black Tiger tribe gathered, they began to march toward the White Bear tribe's territory in a mighty manner. After Blindswar received the news, he immediately sent a message to Xiaoyang and asked him to be prepared to move when the time was right. After Xiaoyang received the news, he immediately set off and rushed to the battlefield. After all, he didn't want to miss a single detail in a battle like this. That was because he could see a lot of things in some of the details. It was even possible for him to gain more benefits because of this. Xiaoyang wore a black robe, while Princess Mingzhu wore a white skirt. They purposely hid their auras and set off quietly. Blindswa and Blind Right didn't want to miss such a grand occasion, so they followed them. However, they didn't travel together. Instead, they kept a distance. After all, there would be a battle between the 3 tribes, and there would be many people watching. If anyone saw anything, they would be in trouble. Moreover, they were at their doorstep. If there were any changes, the consequences would be unpredictable. Who knows, the Black Tiger tribe might turn around and target the Blue Wolf tribe in a fit of rage. It was even possible. They didn't dare to underestimate the White Bear tribe and Multicolor tribe, who were struggling at death's door, let alone the Black Tiger tribe at its peak. Very soon, Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu arrived at the border of the White Bear tribe. Looks like the White Bear tribe received the news long ago and arranged for people to guard this place, Princess Mingzhu remarked softly. Xiao Yang shook his head and said, I think the White Bear tribe isn't going to fight. Princess Mingzhu was puzzled. They were clearly waiting for the right time. Xiao Yang said that because he knew that although the White Bear tribe's vitality was greatly damaged and the Almighties in the tribe were almost wiped out, they wouldn't be trembling in fear. Moreover, a starving camel was still bigger than a horse. The power distribution that they displayed was extremely unreasonable. Therefore, there was only one explanation, which was that they weren't going to continue fighting. Moreover, given the White Bear tribe's current power, it was impossible for them to start a war with the Black Tiger tribe. This was because they only had a great ancestor. The rest of them were too weak and couldn't help at all. So what if their top-notch abilities were equal? However, those below that were too far apart. Under such circumstances, even if one continued to fight, it would be meaningless. This was because it was destined to be a one-sided battle. Even if one was unwilling to accept it, there was nothing one could do. The 10,000 Beasts realm had always been this cruel. Chapter 2430. At the end of the day, the current White Bear tribe was only strong in appearance. On the surface, they had a fifth-order martial emperor, but other than him, the remaining martial emperor experts could be counted on one hand. In the war with the Four Realms Alliance, they had lost all their elites, and the remaining were the old, the young, the sick, and the disabled. Under such circumstances, wanting to fight against the Black Tiger tribe was undoubtedly a fool's dream. In the beginning, the Black Tiger tribe might have been afraid of the fifth-order martial emperor ancestor and the multicolored tribe's strength. However, now that these problems had been solved, there was no need to think about it anymore. Now was the best time to unify them. No matter what, it was not to be missed. That person is Bai Litsong, the only third-order martial emperor expert left in the White Bear tribe. Xiao Yang said in a low voice. Hearing this, Princess Mingzhu could not help but frown slightly. She did not expect that the White Bear tribe, who was insufferably arrogant before the Four Realms Alliance, had fallen to such a state. It could be said that the current White Bear tribe was completely relying on their ancestor, Bai Litsong, to bitterly support them. If Bai Litsong were to fall, the tribe would probably collapse with a loud bang. When the house was about to collapse, one person shouldered the burden. Looks like this will be a one-sided crush. Princess Mingzhu smiled bitterly. Xiao Yang shook his head helplessly and said, That is indeed the case. Therefore, what we need to watch is the battle between the two fifth-level martial emperors. As long as we can kill them both, it will be enough. Hearing this, Princess Mingzhu smiled bitterly and helplessly. It was already extremely difficult for them to kill Qi together. Now, it was even easier to kill the two of them. How could it be easy? Thinking about these problems, Princess Mingzhu felt a headache. As such, she could also foresee that today's mission would be extremely difficult. It would not be easy to complete it. The more she thought about it, the greater the pressure in her heart. She could only hope that the battle between the two of them would be more tragic. Only then would they be able to find an opportunity. Otherwise, it would be very difficult to achieve this. Originally, Xiao Yang thought that he could rely on this method to weaken the core strength of the three tribes. But now, it seemed that this was wishful thinking. After all, it was 2 against 1. In addition, the White Bear tribe strength was very low, so there was no intense battle. Naturally, the number of people sacrificed would be very few. However, it didn't matter. After all, the fall of an expert was enough to shock a tribe. In fact, it was normal for there to be changes in the political situation of a place. It was as if Qi's death had already caused the situation in the southeast to change dramatically. If Xiaoyang had not interfered, the Black Tiger tribe would have completely unified the southeast region. In time, their strength would have become even stronger. Of course, this would only happen if things went smoothly. If things did not go smoothly, the battle between the Black Tiger tribe and the Multicolor tribe would probably break out in the southeast. How confident are you? Princess Mingzhu suddenly turned her head and asked with a smile. Xiao Yang shook his head and said, as long as they can fight and fight with their lives on the line, then the chances are very high. If they don't fight, then we won't have a chance. What he said was very true, and it was the truth. It was already very difficult for them to deal with a fifth-order martial emperor realm expert. Moreover, the White Tiger tribe had brought all their elites, so it would be difficult for them to kill their way in. As for the White Bear tribe, if they surrendered under such circumstances, the two martial emperors would probably join forces. By then, there would be even less of a chance. Therefore, the best outcome would be for the two of them to start a war. It would be best if they fought to the death. It was only in such a situation that they could achieve the greatest results. Looks like whether we can gain anything today will depend on them. Princess Mingzhu smiled bitterly and helplessly. With their strength, it was difficult for them to control the progress of the general situation. However, once the general situation started, they had the ability to push it. Once it was pushed, they could fish in troubled waters. All of this sounded simple, but it was an entirely different matter to actually do it. Everyone had different opinions about this. No one could tell what would happen next, so they could only continue to wait. After a short while, they sensed a group of extremely tyrannical auras approaching. They're here. As soon as he finished speaking, he looked up and saw a black mass of people rushing toward him at high speed. Bailey Tsong stood at the pass. When he sensed the aura, his legs trembled uncontrollably. As the ancestor was in seclusion, Bailey Tsong was the strongest and had the highest cultivation realm. Therefore, all he could do was to wait here for the other party to arrive. Bailey Tsong was under a lot of psychological pressure. Moreover, he knew that if this matter was handled well, they would be able to escape this disaster. Otherwise, there was a possibility of their tribe being exterminated. Although Bailey Tsong had already let some of the good seedlings leave this place after receiving the news, it was another matter for the White Bear tribe to rise again. It was not rare for the tribe to be exterminated after a few years. Therefore, what Bailey Tsong could do now was to fight for a chance of survival. No matter what, he had to try. Bailey Tsong looked at the piles of boxes around him and took a deep breath. He had taken out almost all of his belongings, hoping that the other party would see his sincerity. Not long after, the group of White Tiger tribe had already arrived in front of the mountain pass. The leader was domineering. With just a glance, he gave off a sense of righteousness and dignity. He was extremely domineering. Behind that person was a pampered child. There was a person sitting in the pampered child. That person looked extremely burly. His eyes were slightly closed, and he looked very relaxed, as if he was taking a nap. Bailey Tsong couldn't help but be shocked when he saw such a scene, because he could tell that this time the Black Tiger clan could be considered to have moved out in full force. Judging from their behavior, it was clear that they were here to exterminate their entire clan. Bailey Tsong's mind couldn't help but be stunned. Could it be that there was no way out? Bailey Tsong welcomed the Tiger King. Although Bailey Tsong was unwilling, he could only do so for the tribe. Chapter 2431. Looking at the palanquin, Bailey Tsong's heart felt heavy. Today, whether or not the White Bear tribe could continue to survive would depend on his adaptability. If they did well, they would be able to survive for a while longer. If not, it would be the end of the tribe. Bailey Tsong could not do anything about it. In fact, he even cursed the Bai clan's 8 generations of ancestors in his heart. He even said that Bai Wuxi's intelligence was the best in the entire beast realm. But in the end, he led a small group of elites to be killed. Even their entire tribe lost their lives on the battlefield of the drifting cloud realm. Because of this, the White Bear tribe suffered a great loss. It was almost a problem for them to protect themselves. Moreover, Bailey Tsong had urgently retreated from the battlefield of the Enflame realm. Although the Enflame realm still had a part of its strength, it was useless for the current situation. After all, In order to start the war against the Four-Realm Alliance, they had retreated most of their experts. They wanted to take them down in one go. But who would have thought that things would turn out like this? Regarding this, Bailey Tsong felt even more helpless. Originally, the White Bear tribe was thriving, but because of this unforeseen event, the tribe was almost annihilated. It was hard for anyone to accept such a situation. Bailey Tsong rushed back this time and took over a mess. But no matter how bad the mess was, it was still his tribe. He had to come back. But there was no response from the palanquin. Bailey Tsong's breathing could not help but stop, but he did not dare to be angry. After all, the one sitting in the palanquin was the Tiger King. He was the king of the Black Tiger tribe, a fifth-level martial emperor. With their current ability and confidence, they really did not have the ability to challenge him. Therefore, Bailey Tsong had no choice but to bend his knees and endure. No matter how unhappy he was, there was nothing he could do. After all, it was good enough that this matter could be resolved peacefully. Sometimes asking for too much was just asking for humiliation. Thinking of this, Bailey Tsong felt a little better. After all, everything he did now was for the survival of the White Bear tribe. It was not for his own selfish reasons. If he thought of everything too simply, he was afraid that it would ruin everything. As long as he could survive, what was the point of swallowing his anger? After all, as long as he was still alive, everything was still possible. If he let his anger get the better of him, he would have to pay a huge price. Furthermore, that was something that they could not bear. The leader of the group sneered. He felt that the White Bear tribe actually had such an idiot. It was obvious that the White Bear tribe wanted to destroy their tribe and then swallow up their forces. Now he still wanted to be kind? Was this even possible? Even a 3-year-old child would think that this was impossible. How could Bailey Tsong, who had made great contributions in the Inflame realm, not see through it? Bailey Tsong, don't you know what you've done? We're here to seek justice. The leader shouted angrily. Bailey Tsong sneered in his heart. The so-called justice was just a one-sided statement. If it weren't for the White Bear tribe's territory, how could they possibly muster such a large force? However, sometimes having a reason to send troops could indeed save a lot of trouble. Regarding this, Bailey Tsong felt extremely helpless. He could not understand why the Multicolor tribe, which was also one of the top 10 tribes, would seek refuge with the Black Tiger tribe and even be willing to be their slaves. The Black Tiger tribe's ambition was as clear as day. They wanted to unify the entire southeastern region. Did they not understand the principle of interdependence? Everyone, I think there's some misunderstanding here. Everyone knows that our great ancestor has been in closed-door cultivation for many years. He's been trying to break through to the next realm. If he doesn't break through, he won't come out of closed-door cultivation. Therefore, how could he assassinate Senior Shingongqi? I think there must be some misunderstanding here. There's a villain behind this, Bailey Tsong explained. Bailey Tsong also had a lot of doubts about this matter. However, he was certain that the great ancestor would not come out of closed-door cultivation to assassinate Senior Shingongqi. However, even after pondering for a long time, he still couldn't find any clues as to where the unforeseen event was. In addition, due to the war with the Four Realms Alliance, their vitality was greatly damaged. They also had a shortage of manpower. Therefore, it was very difficult for them to investigate this matter. Misunderstanding? Then let me ask you, is the Thunder God's Furious Throw a unique skill of the White Bear tribe? Someone stood out and questioned angrily. This person was Shengong Hong from the Multicolor tribe. He was Shingongqi's younger brother. Ever since his elder brother got into trouble, he was the one who advocated using this method to take revenge. Of course, there were also some dirty things involved in this. For example, the Tiger King had promised that after the White Bear tribe was pacified, he would help Shingong Hong become the tribe leader. Bailey Tsong nodded helplessly. That was indeed the case. I'm afraid there are only 3 people in your tribe who know how to use this skill. At this point, other than your great ancestor, who else could it be? Shingon Hong continued to question. His question made it even harder for Bailey Tsong to defend himself. There must be a reason behind this. It's just that we haven't investigated it thoroughly yet. I hope that the Tiger King can give us some time. After we've investigated it thoroughly, we'll definitely give everyone an explanation and an explanation to the multicolor tribe. Today, I've prepared a generous gift as a small token of my respect. As Bailey Tsong spoke, he spread out his hand. Behind him was a mountain of boxes. Moreover, these boxes were filled with priceless treasures. It could be said that the White Bear tribe had almost emptied out all their assets. However, there was no other way. At this point, they could only deal with it this way. This skill is your blood inheritance skill. Who do you think can leak it out? How dare you quibble in front of me? A deep voice suddenly came from the palanquin. In the next moment, a sharp light shot out from the palanquin and directly pierced Bailey Tsong's heart. When the sharp light exploded, it blasted Bailey Tsong's body into pieces. It was a horrible sight to behold. The Tiger King had not even shown up, but his attack was already so vicious. Xiao Yang and Princess Mingzhu, who were watching from the other side, were slightly moved. However, they had also received new information. The war this time would probably not end until one of them was dead. It was bustling with activity and everyone was going for benefits. Chapter 2432. In fact, both Xiao Yang and Princess Mingzhu knew that even if there were some misunderstandings, would the Black Tiger tribe listen to them obediently? The intentions of the Black Tiger tribe were clear as day with their actions. They wanted to defeat the White Bear tribe and take over their territory. They even wanted to continue to the south and unify the entire southeast region in one go. Even if there was a rumor saying that they were wrong in the end, the Black Tiger tribe would probably choose to make the best of it and unify the southeast region first. After all, it was a heaven-sent opportunity. If they missed this great opportunity, they did not know when the next one would be. Therefore, they knew the severity of the matter. Therefore, they had to act quickly. Otherwise, when the others came back to their senses, there would be more possibilities of things happening. Therefore, it was best to put it in their pocket as soon as possible. Everything seemed to be in a hurry, but in fact it was premeditated. It could even be said that the Black Tiger tribe had already started to plan when they knew that the White Bear tribe had suffered great losses in the battle in the flowing cloud boundary. However, they did not make a move because they were afraid. But now the opportunity had come, and it had been delivered to them. If they didn't cherish it, it wouldn't make sense. After all, it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. However, it was a pity for Bailey Kong. He felt that there was still a chance, and he wanted to fight for it. However, in the end, he ended up being torn apart. It seems like we'll have an easier time this time. Princess Mingzhu turned around and said with a smile. Xiao Yang nodded slightly. Judging from the Tiger King's ruthlessness, he would not give the other party a chance. When the time came, he would definitely engage in an intense battle with the White Bear tribe to prevent any future troubles. In fact, if he did not kill the White Bear tribe's ancestor, he would not be able to sleep well. Once the battle between fifth-level martial emperors was fully spread out, both sides would suffer great losses in the end. Therefore, when the time came, they only needed to seize the opportunity to reap the benefits. I wonder how the White Bear tribe's ancestor is compared to the Tiger King's strength, Princess Mingzhu said softly as she touched the jade pendant on her waist. It would be best if the two of them were evenly matched because only such a battle to the death would cause both of them to suffer heavy losses. If it was a one-sided battle, it would not be an easy task to kill any of the living almighties. Therefore, this matter was also filled with anticipation. They used the hearts of the people in the realm of beasts to stir up the situation in the southeast and drag the three great tribes into it. However, no one knew what the final outcome would be. However, since they were able to stand in a tripartite balance for such a long time, it was sufficient to see that the strength of the three sides was on par, because only in this way could they restrain and pull each other back. Otherwise, if one side's strength was too weak, they would have been annihilated long ago. How could they have lived in peace for so long? I feel that this time we have a great chance of eliminating these two patriarchs, Xiaoyang said firmly. Moreover, this was the result that Xiaoyang wanted. That was the plan from before, and their ability to execute it was no small matter. Therefore, they were all very confident and felt that all of this was feasible. However, it was hard to say whether they would succeed in the end. After all, the affairs of the world were unpredictable and unpredictable. They could only wait and see. They could not even take action until the crucial moment to avoid alerting the enemy. Although everyone knew that the reason for the start of this war was because the Black Tiger tribe wanted to start a war and expose their ambitions. However, they needed a reason. Once this reason was gone, it would be difficult for them to continue fighting. Therefore, Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu did not dare to show themselves. Blind Left and Blind Right, who were hiding in another place, were also frightened out of their wits when they saw the Tiger King's methods. A few days ago, Bai Lizong had also sent people to the Grey Wolf tribe and requested for the two of them to come together. However, they refused because of some trivial matters and did not dare to come. Now, they were also rejoicing that they had made the right choice. Otherwise, they would be buried together with Bai Lizong. Now, Blind Left and Blind Right could only hope that Xiaoyang could destroy the Black Tiger tribe. Otherwise, once the Black Tiger tribe destroyed the White Bear tribe, they would be the next target. When that happened, the flames of war would definitely spread to the Grey Wolf tribe's territory. At this moment, Shingong Han led his men to destroy all the White Bear tribe warriors. Their only leader, Bai Lizong, was gone. They did not even have a single martial emperor. How could they stop the multicolor tribe's attack? Even so, he still felt that it was not enough to vent his hatred. Shingong Han was also very unhappy. However, the hatred for his brother's death made it difficult for him to maintain his rationality. Originally, the multicolor tribe still had a chance to survive. However, because of the White Bear tribe's attack, they had no choice but to lower their heads. However, in the realm of beasts, if they wanted to survive, sometimes they had to be smart and follow the general trend. Otherwise, when the time came, they would be the unlucky ones. Let's continue forward and avenge brother Shingong, Tiger King said again. When he said this, the warriors of the multicolor tribe immediately cheered excitedly. They also wanted to pay with blood. Previously, they did not dare to act rashly because they were afraid of the White Bear tribe's great ancestor strength. However, now that they had Tiger King's support, they were no longer afraid. For a moment, the warriors of the multicolor tribe rushed to the front as if they wanted to flatten the White Bear tribe's territory. The leader just now was called Black Peak. His strength was not bad. Since he was able to lead at the front, he was naturally a hero. However, when he saw that the people of the multicolor tribe were so unruly, he could not help but frown. However, he thought about it again. It was not a big deal. After all, it was just an excuse. Now, they could do whatever they wanted. As long as they took down the White Bear tribe, they would have to bow their heads. At that time, it would not be too late to teach them what the rules were. As for before, it was because they had to consider the big picture. Therefore, no matter how unhappy they were, they could only tolerate it for the time being. As long as they did not delay the big picture, everything else was easy to deal with. It was just for the time being, so there was no need to flare up. Chapter 2433. After Bai Lizong's death, according to the information they had, the number of martial emperors in the White Bear tribe could be counted on one hand. Moreover, most of them were only in rank 1 or rank 2. To them, they did not need to worry at all. Therefore, they only needed to charge in with a spurt of energy and make the other party pay with blood. Moreover, this war gradually became a war for the multicolor tribe to vent their anger. Perhaps this was a characteristic of the 10,000 beasts realm. Once a war started, the other party would be unable to recover from the setback and might even be annihilated. The elderly, the young, the women, and the children were not in their consciousness. Therefore, they raised their butcher's knives. As long as they saw the people of the White Bear tribe, they would slaughter them without hesitation. Shingong Hong had also done his best in this matter. Of course, he also felt that this was a great opportunity to show his loyalty. As long as the Tiger King sensed his sincerity, it would not matter even if he became a puppet in the future. As long as the multicolor tribe could continue to exist and not be annihilated, there would always be hope for them to rise again. Perhaps, when would there be another Shingong Chi? When that time came, the hope of the multicolor tribe's revival would arrive. Therefore, this was the only thing he could do now. He would do his best to let the multicolor tribe continue to exist. As for other matters, it could only be said that it was difficult for him to attend to them. However, the anger in Shingong Hong's heart was real. Now he needed to vent it. And this hatred could only be cleansed with fresh blood. After Black Peak dismissed the idea, he did not think too much about it. He only shook his head. He felt that it was normal for the multicolor tribe to be agitated now. After all, how could they remain calm when their pillar of support had been killed? Black Peak even felt a faint sadness in his heart. This was because he and Shingong Chi were from the same generation. In the southeast, he had always been suppressed by others. He still thought that one day he would be able to defeat Shingong Chi and let the 10,000 Beasts realm know that he, Black Peak, was not inferior to Shingong Chi. He was just a late bloomer. However, who would have thought that he would no longer have the chance to do so? He could not defeat Shingong Chi head-on. No matter how high his realm was in the future, it would be difficult for him to prove anything. "Let's move on," the Tiger King said. Hei Feng nodded and waved his hand. Immediately, the vast and mighty army set off once again. Wherever the army passed, broken limbs could be seen. At present, the territory of the White Bear tribe was practically dyed red with blood. Previously, the White Bear tribe had only lost their elites to the Four Realms Alliance. However, the ordinary warriors below the elite level were still left behind. However, there was still a gap between their strength and that of the other two clans. Therefore, even though it was just the warriors of the multicolor tribe, it was already difficult for them to resist. Due to the advantage of the martial emperors, the battle had become one-sided. It could be said that this was a complete massacre. Blood flowed like a river. Black Peak didn't care about this at all. If he wanted to exterminate a tribe, he would have to eliminate them completely. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a good sign if the spring wind blew again. In the past, there was also a civil war among the 10 great tribes. Initially, they had already defeated the other side. However, they didn't know that they had missed something. 3,000 years later, they were exterminated by the geniuses of the other tribe. It was also from then on that the civil war in the realm of beasts became exceptionally cruel. Once the war started, it was an existence that would not stop until one side was dead. The Tiger King was still sitting calmly in the palanquin. It was as if he was not the least bit interested in the situation of the battle outside. After all, the Tiger King had always only had one opponent, and that was the head of the White Bear tribe. The reason why the White Bear tribe could continue to exist now was also because of him. As long as he could kill that person, the White Bear tribe would completely disappear from the realm of beasts. After a long time, when the Black Tiger tribe's army had completely left, Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu moved to follow them. Although they had used some methods to hide themselves, the Black Tiger tribe's army could be said to be numerous. If they gave themselves away in the slightest, they would most likely be exposed. Therefore, they had to be more careful to avoid any accidents. If they could avoid places that could be avoided, they would definitely avoid them. Otherwise, when there was a problem, they would have to worry about their own safety. Along the way, Princess Mingzhu looked at the ground that was covered in blood. The air was filled with the thick smell of blood. She could not help but frown again. Even infants who were still in swaddling clothes could not escape death. The cruelty of war could be said to be a ghastly sight. Even if they were enemies, Princess Mingzhu's heart was filled with pity. However, she had to harden her heart. After all, Everything they did was to prevent such a problem from occurring in the Four-Realm Alliance in the future. Otherwise, when the realm of Beast's butcher's knife was aimed at them, the Four-Realm Alliance would not have an easy time. They might even be slaughtered to the point that not even chickens and dogs would be spared. Sometimes compassion was not a good thing. Xiao Yang only glanced at it indifferently. However, he could not help but feel touched in his heart. However, there was nothing he could do. The nature of the realm of beasts was like this. No one could do anything about it. Moreover, if he stood out now, such a place would most likely appear in the drifting cloud realm in the future. At that time, he was afraid that he would be even more heartbroken. Therefore, everything he did now was because he was helpless. Since he had come to this point, he could only continue to move forward. He had to put aside everything else. Otherwise, in the end, he would only be asking for trouble. Under Xingong Hong's leadership, the multicolor tribe's morale could be said to be high. Very quickly, they killed their way to the White Bear tribe's old nest. Along the way, he had carved out a path of blood. After killing their way into the old nest, Xingong Hong did not show any mercy and continued to kill. This was because he had the Tiger King behind him. This time, he wanted the White Bear tribe to pay with their blood. What was wrong with that? As long as he had the confidence, he could do whatever he wanted without any worries or worries. In the White Bear tribe, one after another, their clansmen died under the butcher's knife. As for the Tiger King's army behind, they continued to move forward slowly. It was as if this war had nothing to do with them. It was just the multicolor tribe's revenge. This time they did not make a move. They were happy to be free. Since the multicolor tribe was so willing to make a move, they could just let them do it. They could also relax a little. The multicolor tribe is so bold. How dare you attack? Chapter 2434. A loud shout was heard, and the voice was filled with extreme anger. Although the person had yet to appear, the voice had already caused the warriors of the multicolor tribe to subconsciously stop. They did not dare to continue fighting. Even Xingong Hong subconsciously took a few steps back because he could feel the strength of the pressure. Naturally, he knew who the person who had spoken was. That was the White Bear tribe's patriarch, who was in the 5th level martial emperor realm. Even in the entire beast realm, he was one of the most influential people. Compared to him, who was in the 3rd level martial emperor realm, Xingong Hong was much weaker. Therefore, under such circumstances, he did not dare to act rashly. Otherwise, the slightest carelessness would cause one's soul to scatter. Therefore, he also wanted to leave this place. It was very easy for a 5th level martial emperor realm almighty to kill him. It was also because Xingong Hong knew this in his heart that he did not dare to act rashly. In fact, he even had the thought of running away. However, on second thought, he remembered that he had the Tiger King's support, so he calmed down a little and did not tremble in fear. This time, they had come with great momentum and were well prepared. They could easily eliminate the White Bear tribe. At this critical juncture, how could he let his legs go soft? If he acted like a coward, how could he lead the multicolored tribe in the future? Xingong Hong took a deep breath. He tried his best to calm his emotions, but it was difficult to do so. The fear that came from the bottom of his heart was not so easy to erase. At this moment, Xingong Hong realized that they had killed too quickly. Perhaps the Tiger King's main force was still advancing leisurely behind them. If they did not arrive, once the White Bear tribe's patriarch attacked, they would probably die. Regarding this, Xingong Hong could not speak of his suffering. He felt very uncomfortable. This situation was also not what he had expected. The more he thought about it, the more uncomfortable Xingong Hong felt. Sometimes, no matter how confident a person was, he still needed to know how to restrain himself and judge his limits. Otherwise, he would have fallen into this situation. Bailey's song. Xiao Yang muttered subconsciously. Although it could be said that Xiao Yang and Princess Mingzhu had set off later, the advance of the Black Tiger tribe's army was truly too slow. Therefore, they had also found an opportunity, and promptly rushed to this place to hide in order to find a safer place to watch the battle. Even though there was killing everywhere, they used some methods and managed to sneak in easily. Furthermore, he found a relatively safe place to land. In addition, each of them had their own robes and jade pendants to conceal their auras, so they were even more inconspicuous and wouldn't be noticed by others. In this way, their concealment became even more thorough. As for blind left and blind right, they did not continue to follow and observe closely. They didn't have such means. If they were discovered by the Tiger King when the time came, they would probably have to bear the consequences in the end. But now, blind left and blind right wanted to know the situation here very much. After all, the changes in the current situation were very important to them. They could only come up with corresponding countermeasures and adaptations if they knew the situation clearly. Although Xiaoyang had long told them to observe the changes and clean up the mess when these tribes were almost done fighting, they were still somewhat restless. After all, once the White Bear tribe was annihilated, it would be a windfall for their tribe if they could covet some of the resources left behind by the White Bear tribe. It would be enough to increase their strength by a lot. Seems like this guy is really in seclusion. Princess Mingzhu frowned slightly and said softly. Xiaoyang smiled and nodded. He knew this from the souls of the core figures of the White Bear tribe. Moreover, he knew that this old guy was very stubborn. If he didn't break through to the next realm, he would probably not come out of seclusion. Now, if he hadn't sensed that the opponent had already killed his way into his nest, he would probably never make a sound. Xiaoyang also made use of this point to cause discrepancies in the information of both sides. In addition to being driven by a utilitarian mindset, this matter was almost certain to succeed. As such, the situation could be considered to have reached its peak at this moment. As for what would happen next, it was not something that he could control. Following this, Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu could only observe the changes and wait for the two almighty beings to meet and fight. By then, once an opportunity appeared, they would be able to reap the benefits. There's a good show to watch, Xiaoyang said with a smile. When Bai Lisong came out and saw his tribe members being killed, he would probably be completely enraged and might even lose his mind. Once a battle broke out, he would probably go all out to seek justice for his people. Such a situation was what Yangming wanted to see. All of a sudden, an old man in a black robe slowly walked out from the tall building. Although his hair and beard were white, the resoluteness between his brows was extremely eye-catching. His domineering aura was also nurtured by being in a high position for many years. Bai Lisong looked over and saw that most of his people had collapsed on the ground. Blood flowed like a river. Suddenly his eyes turned red. It was obvious that he was furious. At the same time, Bai Lisong could not understand why such a situation had occurred. However, his anger had already soared to the sky. Shingong Hong, you've got guts. How dare you come here and kill me? Bai Lisong said as he clenched his fist. Suddenly, Shingong Hong, who was standing in the distance, was choked by his throat and lifted up in the void. Shingong Hong struggled continuously. However, no matter how hard he struggled and used all his skills, it was difficult to resist. Immediately after, Bai Lisong's hand suddenly exerted force and Shingong Hong's neck was broken. Even the vitality in his body was completely suppressed. Just like that, he died. A 5th-level Martial Emperor powerhouse killing a 3rd-level Martial Emperor powerhouse was like squashing a chicken. When the warriors of the multicolor tribe saw this scene, they were instantly in a state of panic. Everyone was terrified. If the great ancestor of the White Bear tribe attacked them, how could they resist? In fact, they could not even fight him. They could only wait helplessly for their deaths. In addition, this time, their leader had been killed directly. This was a huge blow to their morale. They had charged at the forefront and were about to face the anger and venting of the powerhouse. It would be difficult for them to survive. Old Bear Bailey, you're really good at bullying the younger generation. You killed him just like that. Chapter 2435. At that moment, Bai Li Song had many doubts in his heart. This was because he could not sense the existence of any powerhouse in the tribe. Even then, there were only 2 martial emperors who were still alive. Moreover, they were only at rank 1. What kind of great change had happened that caused the White Bear tribe's almighty to disappear? For a moment, he was even more confused. Could it be that something had happened in the Flame world, and many powerhouses had gone to suppress them? If that was the case, would the multicolored tribe not be angered by the entire Wanshou realm if they took action? At that time, would they be able to endure that kind of fury? After hearing that voice, Bai Li Song could not help but frown. Naturally, he knew who the owner of the voice was. I didn't expect Qi to be so short-sighted as to join forces with you to deal with the White Bear tribe. So what if the 2 of you join forces? Once the White Bear tribe is destroyed, do you think the multicolored tribe can still stand in the southeast? Bai Li Song said coldly. Bai Li Song did not know what had happened, which was why he had such thoughts. He thought the multicolored tribe and the Black Tiger tribe had joined forces to destroy the White Bear tribe. However, such an action could be said to be very foolish. The 3 great tribes seemed to be standing in the southeast, but there was still a gap in strength between them. The multicolored tribe was the weakest. It could even be said that if the multicolored tribe did not have Bai Li Song, they would have been kicked out of the 10 great tribes and might even have been destroyed. As such, Bai Li Song could understand why the multicolored tribe could kill their way into the hinterland of the White Bear tribe. If the 2 tribes joined forces, it would be difficult to resist. Now, Bai Li Song was unable to restrain his anger. At the same time, he also felt that Qi was so stupid. In the past, they had close relations with the Black Tiger tribe only to protect themselves. He did not expect that they would really become the Black Tiger tribe's dogs. After all, they were one of the 10 great tribes. It was really despicable for them to do such a thing. Old Bear, you're still playing the fool? That's not appropriate. If you dare to do it, you have to admit it. Tiger King laughed. As for Hong's death, Tiger King did not mention it at all, because in his opinion, Hong was just an excuse for him to attack the White Bear tribe. Moreover, once the White Bear tribe was exterminated today, they would definitely continue to move south. At that time, the previous deal would be a burden. Therefore, now that he had died in the hands of Bai Li Song, it had saved the Tiger King a lot of trouble. His goal had been achieved, and whether or not the chess piece still needed to exist was irrelevant. In fact, the existence of some chess pieces could even affect the progress of the game. Therefore, it was a good thing for him to be eliminated earlier. As soon as Bai Li Song came out, he encountered such a problem. He was a little confused and didn't know what was going on. In the past few decades, he had been in seclusion for the sake of advancing his realm. It could be said that he had not paid attention to the outside world. It was all for the sake of pushing the White Bear tribes ranking forward. It was even possible to unify the entire southeast. The supreme experts of the 3 clans all had such ambitions. They all wanted to be on equal footing with the other clans, so they needed to be confident. As long as one of them could agree to unify the southeast, the resources in their control would be no small matter. When the time came, his influence would naturally rise along with it. Until now, Bai Li Song still couldn't figure out what was going on. However, Bai Li Song was clear about another thing. This time, the Black Tiger tribe and the multicolored tribe had come together. It was impossible to settle this matter peacefully. Therefore, how to protect his tribe and himself had become the number 1 problem in Bai Li Song's heart. Moreover, there were many problems in this matter, which made him feel very helpless. Now that things had come to this, Bai Li Song could only quickly think about what was going on. Old Bear, you really know how to pretend. A month ago, you went to the main peak of the multicolor mountain range and used the secret skill, Thunder God's Furious Throw, to kill Brother Qinggong. Are you trying to play dumb and shirk responsibility? The Tiger King spoke again. As soon as he said that, Bai Li Song was even more confused. When had he ever done such a thing? All of a sudden, The great ancestor also felt that something was wrong. This was because the dangerous situation they were witnessing right now was simply too bizarre. Moreover, when the tribes started fighting, no one from the other large tribes came out to mediate. Then, what exactly happened during this period that made the Tiger King so bold? At that moment, Bai Li Song was more and more confused. However, he also knew that the current situation was too unclear. It was likely that some people with ulterior motives had pushed for this. Based on the current situation, the people who benefited the most were probably the Black Tiger tribe. Could it be that they were secretly playing tricks? With that thought, the only answer in Bai Li Song's heart seemed weak and powerless. After all, with the Black Tiger tribe's ability, they probably couldn't come up with a good idea. Moreover, it wasn't easy to kill Qi. Although Qi was a junior, his speed was strange. Even Bai Li Song thought that it would be difficult to take him down. Nonsense. I've been in seclusion all this time. How could I kill Qi? Bai Li Song shouted angrily. For the current Bai Li Song, the most important thing was to figure out the situation in front of him. As for the other things, they could still wait. Otherwise, when this battle started, no matter what, they would feel confused. They wouldn't even know how they died. Even if their tribe was exterminated, they had to figure out what was going on. At that moment, the person in the palanquin also rushed out. He floated high in the sky and looked down on the world. When the warriors of the multicolored tribes saw that person, they were all very excited. Their confidence had come. Naturally, there was no need for them to be afraid. Bai Li Song looked at that person. His eyes were filled with murderous intent. The two powerhouses faced each other. Their auras were even more powerful at that moment. Xiaoyang, who was hiding in the distance, was also concentrating. He even subconsciously held his breath. This was because he knew that the battle between the two powerhouses was about to start. Now that things had developed to this point, it was impossible for them to settle this peacefully. Therefore, the ending could only be a fight to the death. Chapter 2436. Moreover, the battle between the two powerhouses was a feast for them. If they could observe it carefully, they might be able to comprehend something from their fighting style. Rocks from other mountains could be used to polish jade. Such a grand occasion was also hard to miss. Of course, Xiaoyang was thinking more. A battle between two powerhouses who were evenly matched would definitely expose many things. If he could find some flaws in it, then it would be much easier to deal with them separately. Since you're stronger, it doesn't matter. We'll find other ways to find out more about you. Then, it won't be difficult to come up with a suitable plan to assassinate you. Even though Xiaoyang had fought with many powerhouses of the White Bear tribe, he still didn't dare to say that he understood all the information. What he knew was only a general idea. He would only know the specifics after watching it. At this moment, Princess Mingzhu was also concentrating. Although her foundation was already solid after the battle with Qi, she still felt that it was too boring. However, she still felt that it was a little uninteresting, so she also wanted to observe it. How could she miss such a great opportunity? Moreover, if she could learn more today, she might be able to continue moving forward and go further. Blind left and blind right couldn't bear to miss this battle, so they also found a place to hide 5 kilometers away. Although they weren't easily detected, it was very difficult to observe in detail. Of course, they could also use their divine sense to find out the specific situation, but it was very risky. When the time came, they might be discovered if they weren't careful. By then, they would be in trouble. Therefore, they could only observe with their naked eyes. Even though they were martial emperors, their eyesight was still limited. If only we could have Xiaoyang's robes, Blind Right grumbled. Because they were each blind in one eye, their eyesight wasn't very good. Even if one's cultivation level was high, it would still be difficult to see clearly if one was too far away. Blind Left could only smile helplessly. What could he do about this? Moreover, Xiaoyang wouldn't give the black robe to them so easily. It could be said that the reason why Xiaoyang and Princess Mingzhu were able to push everything forward was because of their concealment technique. After seeing the current situation, Blind Left admired Xiaoyang even more. This young man really had a lot of tricks up his sleeves. With such a plan, he really made the southeast region a mess. Moreover, they could use the Tiger King to get rid of Bai Lisong, who was supposed to be dealt with by them. This was probably the best way to attack one's heart. Moreover, it would save them a lot of trouble and trouble. Be more careful with your words in the future, Blind Left instructed after thinking for a while. Blind You could only nod his head repeatedly. They were well aware of the situation now. If the Songlang tribe wanted to make a fortune out of this chaos, they still needed to rely on Xiaoyang. He was the reason for the rise of the Blue Wolf tribe. Although he didn't do much on the surface, he could stir up a storm. In this way, the three major tribes would be injured one after another. At that time, the Songlang tribe would be able to use this to gain benefits for themselves. The rise of a tribe had always been something that took a long time. It couldn't be achieved overnight. Therefore, the environment was especially important. The situation was still tense. The auras of the two Almighties were fighting, and it made the people below feel an extremely strong pressure. Even those who were slightly weaker felt as if they were about to suffocate, unable to breathe. However, they didn't dare to act rashly and could only endure it. The people of the multicolored tribe were also comforting themselves. They felt that as long as they took revenge, everything would be over. The Tiger King had a faint smile on his face. No matter how one looked at it, he was very proud. How could he not be happy when he thought about how he was going to unify the southeast region? Before this, he had even thought about how to take down the White Bear tribe several times and then unify it in the south. In the end, due to the current situation, no matter how many ideas he had, he couldn't execute them. It was only now that such a great opportunity had appeared due to a series of coincidences. Old dog, don't talk nonsense here. I've been in seclusion for decades. How can I kill Shingongqi? Bai Lisong shouted angrily. The Tiger King smiled and shook his head. It's useless, no matter how you quibble now. Brother Shingong died under the Thunder God's furious throw, and Bai Xingyun and Bai Cheng are dead. Therefore, you're the only one who can use such a secret skill. When the Tiger King said this, Bai Lisong's heart was filled with shock. Bai Xingyun and Bai Cheng were dead? And judging by the Tiger King's tone, they died before this? Bai Lisong was so angry that he felt dizzy. How was this possible? What exactly happened that caused them to lose their lives? Could it be that there was a big change in the battlefield in the Enflame world? At this moment, Bai Lisong's thoughts were running wild. However, it was difficult to prove it at the moment. No wonder the multicolor tribe could kill their way into their lair so easily. So this was the reason. Don't talk nonsense. Bai Lisong shouted angrily. Bai Lisong found it hard to accept this news. In fact, he even felt that this was something that was impossible. Looking at Bai Lisong's expression, the Tiger King frowned slightly. This was because he could feel that Bai Lisong did not know anything. It was likely that he had been in seclusion for the past few decades. However, the Thunder God's furious throw, and the one who could blast Shingongqi into ashes, was only Bai Lisong alone. So, what was the suspicious point in this? Or were there too many things that were unknown to the public? The Tiger King shook his head. He felt that there was no need to fuss over these things. Right now, the most important thing was how to kill this old bear. So what if someone schemed against him or pushed him? After all, only Bai Lisong had the opportunity and possibility to do such a thing. If I kill you, then the White Bear tribe will naturally collapse. When that time came, they would exterminate him and eliminate all the hidden dangers. Then the Black Tiger tribe would be able to do whatever they wanted in the southeast and dominate the world. Bai Lisong suddenly felt that his opponent's aura was rapidly increasing. He had no choice but to become alert. This time it was unavoidable. Chapter 2437. After feeling the Tiger King's aggressive aura, Bai Lisong also understood that the other party had already planned everything. Therefore, it was impossible for this matter to be settled peacefully. A battle between them was unavoidable. At the same time, Bai Li Song also received another piece of information from these words. That was, Shingon Qi was already dead. As long as the two of them did not join forces and fight one-on-one, what did he have to fear? The strength of the two of them was originally on par. Even if they really fought, it was still unknown who would emerge victorious in the end. Bai Li Song also knew that he had no way out. If he could defeat the Tiger King today, then he could still use his strength to support the huge White Bear tribe. However, in the next hundreds or even thousands of years, it would be difficult for them to live peacefully. In the current situation, the White Bear tribe's losses were really too severe. Without a long period of recuperation, it would be impossible to recover. The more he thought about it, the angrier Bai Li Song became. This huge tribe was powerful, but now it was like a bleak scene of autumn wind. How could they feel the same in their hearts? Previously, Bai Li Song thought highly of this junior, Bai Wuxi, so he let Bai Xingyan act as his representative. He did not expect that he would lead the White Bear tribe to the path of destruction. If he was here, how could the White Bear tribe have fallen to such a state today? Bai Li Song took a deep breath. Suddenly, his entire body's essence, energy, and spirit were shaken. The Tiger King also noticed the change in the other party's aura, and the corner of his mouth revealed a trace of a proud smile. As long as they could fight this battle, then the following matters would be much simpler. Moreover, their side was even more powerful. As long as Bai Li Song was there, he would be an arrow at the end of its flight. As long as they could defeat him, the overall situation would be settled. His hegemony seemed to be within reach as well. Whether or not he could have a stronger voice in the Wanshou realm would be determined in this battle. Defeating Bai Li Song was only the first step. It was just the beginning. As long as they occupied the southeast and recuperated, they could even gradually encroach on it. There was even a chance and possibility that they could be on par with those few powerful tribes. At the thought of this, the Tiger King's expression also became much more agitated. In fact, he was even a little unable to control himself. "Old dog, are you sure you want to fight me to the death?" Bai Li Song said in a muffled voice. Of course, for the White Bear tribe who were at a disadvantage, not fighting today was naturally the best outcome. If the other party really wanted to be aggressive, there was no other way but to fight. Furthermore, Bai Li Song had to win this battle. If he were to lose, he would have to face the calamity of the extermination of his clan. The White Bear tribe had only achieved what they had today through unification. If they were to perish just like that, how could they live up to the passion and fighting of those years? Even though he was dying, he still wanted to try and pull his tribe back from the brink of destruction. Although the possibility of this was very small, if one did not try, how would one know that it would not succeed? "It's not that I want to fight to the death with you," Tiger King said coldly. "It's just that you attacked Brother Shingon. You're guilty of many crimes. I'm just taking revenge for the multicolor tribe. I want to give them justice." Hearing this, Bai Li Song laughed with slight disdain. He did not expect this old dog to learn from the human cultivator's benevolence and righteousness. If he wanted to expand his influence, he could just do it. Why would he say such disgusting words? It was simply despicable. Although reputation did not play a big role in the realm of beasts, it was still useful sometimes. For example, this time, the other tribes did not come to stop the war between them. Of course, there were many reasons for this. The White Bear tribe had suffered heavy losses. They only had a 5th-level martial emperor almighty. If they were still standing as a tribe, it was equivalent to lowering their own status. In addition, the other tribes had sent out their troops, which meant that it was for revenge. After considering many factors, the other tribes did not make a move and allowed the White Bear tribe to cause trouble. Moreover, the southeast was relatively barren, and there were 3 of the 10 great tribes. This kind of territorial distribution was unreasonable. Therefore, under this general trend, the situation was changed. Everything was shuffled, and a new situation was formed. This was not necessarily a bad thing. As for which of the three tribes stood out, they were all well aware. If there was really an anomaly, it was also a good thing. After getting a clear answer, Bai Li Song did not hesitate anymore. With a roar, thunder suddenly lingered around his body. Since there was no way to avoid it, the only way was to fight. In the situation where there was no way to retreat, he could only use his fists to fight a way out. Otherwise, he could only wait for death. That was not Bai Li Song's style. No matter how dangerous this battle was, Bai Li Song could not afford to lose. In addition, the anger in his heart was soaring to the sky. Now that the White Bear tribe had suffered a great change, he could not accept it. Why was it like this? He could not accept it. Then today, let's try it. Bai Li Song said coldly. As soon as his voice fell, Bai Li Song turned into a bolt of lightning and rushed directly to Tiger King. Seeing this, Tiger King immediately growled and clenched his fists. He also went to meet Bai Li Song. The two of them had a few battles when they were young, but the final result was just a back and forth between them. But today, they were going to determine the winner and the loser, life and death. Under such a situation, their battle was already a foregone conclusion. Roars sounded continuously. Both of them were ferocious beasts, and their physiques were even stronger. Therefore, their fists were very fierce. Under such attacks, the two of them could be said to be back and forth. However, under the sweep of the aftermath of the battle, many people were affected. Xiao Yang looked at such a fierce battle, and the smile at the corner of his mouth became much more helpless. These mighty figures were indeed obtained by ferocious beasts. Although they had cultivated a human form, the degree of toughness of their bodies was still much stronger than theirs. Even though they were still lacking in terms of spiritual energy, their physical strength was still very strong. All things in the great Tao, if it gave you something that you were good at, then there would definitely be something that you were lacking in. In the battle between the two of them, they had always been playing to their strengths and avoiding their weaknesses. However, they could only be arrogant because their strengths were equal. The other strengths and weaknesses were not equal. Unless there was a huge opportunity, they would not take the risk to try. Chapter 2438. The battle between the two was dominating and extremely intense. Even Xiao Yang's blood was boiling. He wanted to go up and fight with them. So what if he wasn't capable enough? To be able to fight like this was something that would be satisfying. However, no matter how excited he was, he had to suppress his emotions. After all, what he was doing was for the drifting cloud boundary. He couldn't mess up the good situation that he had set up because of some of his thoughts. These two sure are ferocious. Princess Ming Zhu took a deep breath and complimented. Princess Ming Zhu was still a little scared about this battle. Even she didn't dare to participate. Or else, she might not be able to defend. Xiao Yang shook his head with a smile. If they were fighting with their fists, even he wouldn't dare to go, let alone Princess Ming Zhu. Even beasts knew how to play to their strengths and avoid their weaknesses. How could they not know? If they used other methods, Princess Ming Zhu could fight against them. However, to fight against those of a higher level, she would be at a disadvantage. In fact, as long as he made a single mistake, he might lose his life. That wasn't strange at all. Xiao Yang thought about it and shook his head, helplessly. What he was doing now wasn't something that could be done on the spur of the moment. As the battle between the two of them became more and more intense, the ripples caused the ground to shake and the mountains to shake. At the same time, Bai Li Song also discovered that his own base had been severely damaged by the aftermath of the battle. If they continued, his home would be leveled to the ground. In fact, many clansmen would lose their lives in such a situation. Therefore, he found a chance and retreated. He had to leave first. The Tiger King didn't stop him either. Instead, he chased after him unhurriedly. He also understood that once Bai Li Song became angry and attacked his clansmen, a single punch from him would probably cause many warriors to lose their lives. Therefore, under such circumstances, the two of them were somewhat fearful. This was why they cooperated so well. You retreat, I chase. but they won't force you into a dead end. Sometimes, once a beast is forced into desperation and goes crazy, it's hard to stop it. The losses that would result from that would be even more immeasurable. Not to mention that Bai Li Song was a fifth-order martial emperor. With this kind of strength, once he went crazy, not to mention those below the martial emperor realm, even martial emperors would be killed. Under these conditions, their tacit understanding was also very good. After leaving the nest, Bai Li Song's attacks suddenly became a lot stronger. There he had his misgivings, but now it was completely gone. In addition, his desire to win was even more serious, so he would fight even harder. In the face of such a fierce attack, the Tiger King could not help but feel a little frightened. Now, Bai Li Song seemed to have gone crazy. This was something that he didn't expect. Bai Li Song knew that he was in a desperate situation. He had no other choice. All he could do was to fight his way out. Moreover, he wanted to use this battle to completely suppress the southeastern region. He wanted to let them know that as long as he, Bai Li Song, was still alive, anyone who wanted to touch the White Bear tribe would have to pay the price. The price would not be small. This was the only way he could have a peaceful life in the days to come. Otherwise, if they continued to be entangled like this, everyone would probably be exhausted. When that time came, he might even be annoyed. For a moment, as Bai Li Song's attacks became fiercer, the Tiger King was actually somewhat suppressed. When the people of the Black Tiger tribe saw this, they felt that something was wrong. The warriors of the multicolored tribe felt a chill in their hearts. If the Tiger King was defeated, they would become the target of his venting. Who in the multicolored tribe could withstand Bai Li Song's attacks? When the battle started, they would only be seeking their own deaths. Therefore, they were all hoping that the Tiger King could emerge victorious from this battle. In a short period of time, the two of them had thrown out countless punches. However, both of them had many injuries on their bodies. However, these were only superficial wounds to them. They were not worth mentioning. Moreover, the pain from the battle stimulated their bestial instincts. The battle became even more intense. Vast field of thunder. With a loud shout, Bai Li Song waved his hand. Instantly, countless thunderbolts descended from the sky like a tornado and attacked the Tiger King. The Tiger King let out a furious roar. That powerful roar immediately caused many people to cover their ears in pain. Those who were close to the Tiger King's realm bled from their 7 orifices and died from the roar. Most of the thunderbolts that fell were shattered by the roar. However, the remaining power landed on the Tiger King's body without hesitation. When Bai Li Song saw that he had gained the upper hand with his attack, he immediately rushed forward and threw out a few more punches. Clearly, he wanted to defeat the Tiger King. In this series of attacks, the Tiger King gradually fell into a disadvantageous position. As Bai Li Song was in a desperate situation to survive, almost all of his potential was stimulated. Moreover, his desire to survive was incomparably strong. After a few more exchanges, the Tiger King could not hold it in any longer and revealed his true form. It was an incomparably huge black tiger, just like an ancient beast. Its black fur looked like steel needles. Do you think that only you have your true form, and I don't? Bai Li Song shouted angrily and revealed his true form immediately. In this unforeseen event, Bai Li Song was even more clear-headed. He knew that he could not lose. Therefore, he could not be at a disadvantage at all. Only in this way could he intimidate people. A white bear and a gigantic black tiger started fighting again in an instant. The white bear was covered in thunderbolts, while the black tiger was surrounded by invisible air blades. They were as sharp as teeth. The battle between the two ferocious beasts became even more intense because of this. It was even getting out of hand. The surrounding mountains were all smashed into powder. Some rivers were not spared either. With their current abilities, it was extremely normal for them to overturn rivers and seas. Therefore, it was not uncommon for mountains and rivers to be destroyed unintentionally. However, the living creatures on this side could not escape from such an intense battle. There was almost no way to survive. Chapter 2439. Let's get out of here. Zhuoxia said with lingering fear. As soon as he said that, the two of them quickly retreated to the back. That was because they saw that the battle between the two almighties had shifted to where they were hiding. If they continued to stay, they might be affected. Even if they were not discovered, they might be injured in the aftermath of the battle. When they got closer, how could their auras not be discovered? By then, they would definitely become the Tiger King's hunting targets. If that happened, their lives would be in danger, and even their own tribes might be affected. The rules in the beast realm were so cruel that killing could happen at any time. It was also because of that the world was always shrouded in blood. The beast realm was very big, and there were many living beings. It was normal for them to be aggressive and aggressive. It could be said that there would be wars every day, which made the world like that. Until now, Bai Li Song still had the upper hand. In fact, the two of them were on par with each other in terms of strength. The reason for that was entirely because of the different environment they were in. The ferocious beasts could only show their abilities when they fought back in a desperate situation. However, there were many possibilities in that. Xiao Yang's eyes were glued to the screen. His gaze had never left the screen. That was because he had already found some suspicious points in the battle between the two almighties. However, he had not proven it yet. After all, it was a battle between ferocious beasts. It might be useful for them to use it, but it would be difficult for him to do it again. On the other hand, Princess Mingzhu was extremely shocked. That was because she had never seen such an intense battle, and it was a fist-to-flesh battle. That could be said to have refreshed her understanding. The ferocious beast's battle style seemed monotonous, but it was very effective. That was because every time they attacked, there would be some substantial benefits. Moreover, in such a situation where they were exchanging injuries for injuries, it was a test of one's physical body and ruthlessness. "Looks like we have a good chance," Princess Mingzhu said as she quietly pulled out her sword. Xiaoyang, on the other hand, shook his head and pressed the sword back. That was because he felt that it was not the right time yet. They could indeed take advantage of the intense battle between the two to take them by surprise and kill them. In other words, it was a great opportunity that could not be missed. However, with that thought in mind, it was easy to overlook another problem. If they failed, the two of them would probably be attacked by the two fellows together. The two of them could deal with a fifth-level martial emperor if they joined forces, but if there were two of them, how could they handle it? Ferocious beasts had rough skin and thick flesh to begin with. It was almost impossible to kill them in one move. Princess Mingzhu could only sigh helplessly. Since Xiaoyang didn't agree, she naturally couldn't force him. Otherwise, when the situation became chaotic, it would only be more disadvantageous to them. Sometimes it was naturally right to think more. It would be good for them to do things safely. If he kept thinking about looking for an opportunity, he would be in a mess. That could be a great opportunity of the way. "There's no rush. Let's wait until they're done," Xiaoyang said softly. Right now, the injuries on both sides were not very serious, so it could be completely ignored. Moreover, both of them had not fully shown their skills, so they could still wait. They could wait until the end of the battle and then find a chance to kill them. Then, their chances would be much higher. Of course, Xiaoyang's idea was very simple. He wanted to appear in front of them without showing his face. If he kept hiding in the dark, it would naturally be much easier to do certain things. As they spoke, the two of them attacked each other a few more times and exchanged injuries. At this point, Tiger King's heart was pounding in fear. He realized that he was a little anxious and forced by Li Song to do something desperate. That was why he was doing what he did today. Xiaoyang's original plan was to let Bai Li Song die in the hands of Tiger King. Then they would think of a way to kill Tiger King. However, it seemed that it was not going to work now. Plans could not keep up with changes. It seemed that it had always been like this. Therefore, they had no choice but to change their previous plan. Therefore, it was best to observe the situation and adapt flexibly. That was the best thing to do. After dozens of rounds, Xiaoyang suddenly held his breath and looked at Bai Li Song carefully. Bai Li Song raised his hand and clenched it. Instantly, the sky changed color, lightning flashed, and thunder rumbled. Xiaoyang could not take his eyes off it because he knew that it was the prelude to the furious throw of the thunder god. Even though Xiaoyang had already learned this move to mastery, he was still lacking a little bit. Now he wanted to see how the old ancestor of the White Bear tribe would use this move. If he could learn the essence of it, this secret skill could also become one of his trump cards. It was a pity that this move required a long time to gather energy. Moreover, it could easily trigger strange phenomena in the sky, and the enemy could easily detect it. After Tiger King sensed it, he was even more terrified. He did not expect this guy to use his ultimate move against him so quickly. Instantly, Tiger King also whistled continuously as if he was saying something. Those whistling sounds also formed layers of waves in an extremely short period of time, as if they were real. The whistling sounds were deafening, so much so that even one's mind would be shaken. The tiger's roar was also a secret technique. It was a secret technique that belonged to the Black Tiger tribe. Old Bear, do you think you can kill me like this? I didn't dare to be certain before, but now I can be certain that you killed Shingong Qi. Tiger King shouted angrily. Bai Li Song did not reply, but continued to gather energy, wanting to decide the outcome of the battle with this move. However, in the next moment, Bai Li Song had no choice but to take the initiative to attack. Furious throw of the Thunder God. At this moment, Bai Li Song felt a sense of danger, so he had no choice but to do so. At the same time, Tiger King turned a blind eye to the opponent's attack and took the initiative to charge forward as if he was seeking death, but also as if he saw hope and was ready to fight to the death. Bai Li Song's danger came from behind him. Several almighty figures of the Black Tiger tribe had joined forces and were preparing to restrict him. Therefore, Bai Li Song had no choice but to turn around and deal with the trouble behind him. A fourth-order martial emperor might not be a problem, but several of them joining forces was troublesome. Killing binding formation. Chapter 2440. Xiaoyang initially wanted to watch the entire process so that he could learn the secret art's essence. He did not expect to be interrupted halfway, so he felt rather helpless. Needless to say, Xiaoyang would not give up so easily, since he had already learned it well. He would be able to figure out its essence if he continued to study it. Therefore, without such an opportunity, it would be difficult to force it. Princess Mingzhu watched without blinking, and she placed her hand on her sword hilt again. This was because she felt that it would be a great opportunity to kill Bai Li Song if she made a move now. However, she sensed that Xiaoyang's aura did not change at all, so she could only continue to bide her time. After all, if she made a move, it would affect the whole situation. By then, a different situation might occur. In fact, even the setup ahead would be greatly affected. Even though her heart was filled with fighting spirit, she could only suppress it helplessly. Many things could make one feel helpless at times. Even if one had an awe-inspiring killing intent, one could only remain in such a state. In the blink of an eye, the formation had arrived. Even though Bai Li Song sensed it and made a decision in the shortest time possible, he was still caught off guard. No matter how much the lightning around him continued to erupt, it was to no avail. This was because the four of them were fearless with Blackpeak as their leader. They were only injured, but as long as they could create an opportunity to kill the old man, it would be worth it. If they wanted to completely defeat the White Bear tribe, they could only achieve true victory by killing Bai Li Song. If Bai Li Song did not fall, he would always be a hidden danger. As such, it was the most important thing to do to get rid of it. As for the rest, they could be put aside for the time being. What they wanted was a foregone conclusion. They had planned this for so long, and success was already close at hand. So how could they miss such a great opportunity? The opportunity could not be missed, and it would not come again. The four of them each held a pair of daggers, and the daggers looked like they were completely made of tiger fangs. There was a saying behind the 4 pairs of tiger fangs, which were left behind by the Black Tiger tribe's powerhouses after they died. They were extremely sharp, and there was a mystery hidden within. Moreover, it was not inferior to some spiritual artifacts. Black Tiger Mystic Fong. Bai Lisong couldn't help but gasp when he saw the scene. Sure enough, the Black Tiger tribe wanted to put him to death. They even took out such a magic tool. This could be said to be a big deal. The four of them each held the Black Tiger Mystic Fong and formed an array. Although this array seemed to be slightly inadequate, it was not so simple in the myriad beast realm. After all, formations had always been the disadvantage of the realm of beasts. Therefore, sometimes a simple formation was enough to give them a headache. This was also why Xiaoyang had set up so many formations and restrictions in the drifting cloud world at the very beginning. Unless you had the ability to crush it with your strength, you would need to spend a lot of time to break it, and the extra time would be the turning point. At that time, if everything was directed properly, it would have an extraordinary effect. It was also because of this that they were able to achieve a complete victory in the battle, and none of the martial emperors had fallen. However, during that period of time, Xiaoyang had tried his best to protect every expert, which caused him to be physically and mentally exhausted. No matter where he was, he had calculated everything clearly. Otherwise, how could he have made it to this point? Bai Lisong roared furiously. Instantly, the lightning around him became even stronger. He seemed to have shown a fearless look, because to him, what he needed to do now was to protect himself first. When He Feng and the others saw Bai Lisong charging at them, they couldn't help but be shocked. In fact, they all knew that Bai Lisong was fighting like a cornered beast. Therefore, at this time, the power that he exploded out would be even more terrifying. When a ferocious beast's life was threatened and it started to act recklessly, that was the most terrifying moment. Because at that time, it would not care about the gains and losses, causing it to act recklessly and without restraint. Although the four of them were afraid and fearful, they still didn't dare to take half a step back. After all, the big picture was more important. Moreover, in this attempt, there might be an unexpected surprise. The four of them weren't weak. If they were cautious, it would be enough as long as they could survive. In the blink of an eye, countless air blades were shot out continuously, slashing at Bai Lisong crazily. No matter how tough his fur was, in the face of such an attack, it seemed to be unable to defend against it. Wounds and blood kept appearing on his body. The air blades were so strong that they even cut the lightning into halves and obliterated it. This was the power of a magic artifact. If it could be used well, the power it could unleash was not to be underestimated. Go to hell! Following a furious roar, Bai Lisong punched out and directly sent a fourth-level martial emperor flying. It was unknown whether he was still alive or not. He Feng and the other two didn't retreat. They continued to charge forward, as if they wanted to use the Black Tiger Mystic Fong in their hands to take the old man's life. It wasn't that they didn't want to retreat, but if they did, one of them would lose his life. They couldn't bring themselves to do such a thing. Since they had already come this far, there was no point in retreating. They could only choose to fight to the death. At the same time, the Tiger King also arrived. He opened his bloody mouth, revealing a pair of sharp fangs. Roar! With a furious roar, the Tiger King directly bit Bai Lisong's waist, his fangs piercing through his body. He Feng and the others immediately dropped down and stabbed the Black Tiger Mystic Fong in their hands into Bai Lisong's body, his head, arms, and everywhere. However, they couldn't continue to stab. It wasn't because Bai Lisong's skull was too hard, but because of the bursts of lightning, they were all pushed back and couldn't control themselves. The Tiger King bit down hard and wanted to break Bai Lisong's waist. However, because Bai Lisong's bones were too hard, it was difficult to achieve that. Under the intense pain, Bai Lisong also roared in anger. At this moment, his bloodthirst had completely erupted. Because life and death were only a thin line, he couldn't let this situation continue. Otherwise, when He Feng and the others came, he would definitely die. Therefore, he had to break this situation. Chapter 2441. Everything could be said to be closely linked. From the looks of it, the Black Tiger clan had already made sufficient preparations to kill Bailey Song. They had probably rehearsed this scene many times, which was why they could achieve such an effect. In the long run, the Black Tiger tribe had probably wanted to deal with Bai Li Song, kill him, and seize his territory. However, Shingongqi was still alive at that time. They were afraid that he would come out and disrupt the situation. Therefore, they could only wait. However, they did not expect to wait for such an opportunity. Moreover, it was in their favor. How could they defy the will of the heavens? The great cause of unification could be said to be within reach. So how could it be overlooked? Xiao Yong also frowned at this moment. He didn't expect the Black Tiger tribe to be so ferocious. A fifth-order martial emperor realm expert would probably die because of this. They did not need to worry about Bai Li Song. They only needed to focus on dealing with the Tiger King. However, this was still a difficult problem. The 4 generals beside the Tiger King were probably 4th-level martial emperors. If they joined forces, it would be difficult for them to deal with them. Moreover, the Tiger King's injuries were not very serious. Although there were some injuries, it was not as serious as expected. Therefore, this matter was still somewhat difficult to explain. Princess Mingzhu suddenly pulled out her sword. She felt that it was time to catch the Tiger King off guard. Since Bai Li Song was doomed, they only needed to deal with the Tiger King by attacking him from behind. That would be enough. The two exchanged glances and understood what was going on. Xiao Yang's hand was also clenched into a fist, and thunder was gathering. Wait! Xiao Yang suddenly bellowed, stopping Princess Mingzhu from attacking. He saw a small detail. It was an inconspicuous detail. However, it was enough to change the situation. Bai Li Song was unwilling to lose his life. Therefore, he continued to struggle. At this critical moment, he hammered down. Thunder God's furious throw. A lightning spear had appeared in his hand at some point in time. Then, he swung it down and pierced through the Tiger King's body. The Tiger King immediately let go of Bai Li Song in pain. He quickly retreated and began to suppress the lightning energy. Fortunately, the furious Thunder God throw was still not in perfect condition. Otherwise, the Tiger King's life would definitely be in danger. However, he was still seriously injured from the explosion at such a close distance. Immediately after, another lightning spear appeared in Bai Li Song's hand, and his power continued to gather. Bai Li Song allowed blood to seep out of his head and waist, but he didn't even look at them. Instead, he stood there like a god of death with his lightning spear in hand. Seeing this, Black Peak immediately called for a halt. If they rushed over to face the Thunder God's furious throw, they would only be seeking their own deaths in the end. Right now, Bai Li Song had also pushed his strength to the peak because of the desperate struggle of a cornered beast. If they continued to pressure him, they would only suffer greater losses. If he took a step back now and allowed the other party to soften his tone, he might be able to take him down easily. At this moment, the Tiger King had no time to care about Bai Li Song. His priority was to protect himself. Fortunately, Black Peak and the rest cooperated very well. The 3 of them had been staring at Bai Li Song without blinking, causing him to be unable to focus on the other side. Bai Li Song made such a choice because his blood rushed to his head. However, at this moment, he was slightly more clear-headed. Right now, he also began to analyze the situation quickly. Right now, it seemed impossible for him to win this battle. Therefore, what to do next became a difficult problem in his heart. If he wanted to complete it, no matter how he looked at it, it would be difficult to turn the situation around. Even though the Tiger King was seriously injured, his strength still couldn't be ignored. After all, they were all ferocious beasts. Naturally, they understood each other's abilities. Moreover, in the previous intense battle, in addition to his injuries, Bai Li Song's strength was almost depleted. Therefore, the furious Thunder God throw in his hand would be his last attack. He could try to kill the Tiger King with this attack, but he would inevitably lose his life in the attack of Black Peak and the rest. Perishing together with the Tiger King seemed like a good deal. However, Bai Lisong already had a new plan in his heart. The Tiger King was gone, but the Black Tiger tribe still had Blackpeak and the other rank for mighty figures. With their strength, they could still continue to fight and unify the southwest region. On the other hand, the White Bear tribe would probably be gone because of this. As long as he was still alive, he could still reign in his tribesmen and continue to live. Perhaps the White Bear tribe could flourish again after thousands of years. If he were to die, it was easy to imagine what the outcome would be. Therefore, Bai Lisong's only rationality now was to seek a way out for himself. He couldn't die just like that. Moreover, Bai Lisong's survival would always be a threat to them. By then, the Black Tiger tribe would naturally be much more restrained in their actions. Princess Mingzhu was dumbfounded. She didn't expect this change to happen so quickly. Moreover, there were so many variables that it was terrifying. After witnessing how terrifying these ferocious beasts were, Princess Mingzhu became even more cautious. If she were to accidentally encounter such a situation, she would most likely be in a situation where she would die without a doubt. Between life and death, it was very easy for a person to undergo a huge change. What couldn't one do in a frenzy? Moreover, there were still some differences between the thoughts of a beast and that of a human. It was hard to understand. The corners of Xiao Yang's mouth curled up into a smile. Since the battle was so intense, what they were going to do next would be simple. As long as everything was done properly, they could even seek for more things. As for how the situation would develop next, they could only continue to wait and see. If they could fight less, it would naturally be a good thing. Xiao Yang was very patient now. After all, he had already gotten the results he wanted. Moreover, it was smoother than he had expected. It seemed that the intelligence was ultimately dry and difficult to analyze in detail. There could only be one thread. However, they were alive and could change at any time, causing some uncertain factors to be born. It was also because of this that the situation could change rapidly and produce endless possibilities that were hard to predict. Sometimes it would make one feel extremely hopeless, but the next moment, hope would ignite just like before.